Good morning, and welcome to the second day of our summit. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, my name is Teresa Wu Paul, and I'm the chair of Action Chinese Canadians Together Foundation, and I'll be your host today. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Tesicca, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. They were the original occupants of this land and continue to be here to this day. The Chinese Canadian community has a unique tie with the Indigenous communities that started during the building of the Canadian Railroad, when Chinese laborers were given the most dangerous tasks, and many were injured and just left to die, and were nursed back to health by Indigenous peoples. And that unique ties last to today. This particular aspect of the limited documented history is what was shared on the day of the government's apology to the Chinese head tax issue. And I remember somehow this, this is one of the most vivid memory of that day for me. And as a settler and immigrant, but also as a fourth generation of my family in North America, the descendant of a paper son and a member of a family, endured decades of separations and hardships due to the Chinese head tax and exclusion acts that instilled in me an understanding on the generational impact of racist policies and the fundamental need for systemic change to achieve real and sustained transformation. So a little bit of a recap of yesterday. So we started the summit with a focus on what is Chinese Canadian history, and how does it contribute to current issues. We had, I think, a very dynamic dialogue session with Dr. Henry Yeung, who authored the paper, "The White Elephant in the Room, Anti-Asian Racism in Canada," which was followed by a plenary deliberation amongst Dr. Henry Yeung, Dr. Joseph Wong, Georgia Yee, and sincerely yours, me, with Howard Zhang as the moderator. And some of the key elements, some of the key highlights from yesterday include part of challenging the notion of white supremacy means rewriting our own internal narratives of how we see ourselves and our role within Canadian society. So we don't have to be limited by society's view of what being a Chinese Canadian means. We can boldly challenge others who hold this limited perspective of us by words and by actions. So this would require us to redefine and rewrite the model minority narrative, both internally and to others. So I heard comments like, no one is writing that comprehensive, fulsome story about us. We should start writing our own stories. So build a solid community identity, learn from our history in Canada, the challenges and resilience in order to move forward as a group, regardless of where we are from. And also, we need coalition building among our community and beyond the Chinese Canadian communities. And it was also great to hear that people also reinforce the need to invest in leadership. So I hope that you also had, some of you had the chance to join in the fireside chat with the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, and as well as the networking. I hope that you enjoyed the networking, and please continue to make connections, and those are very interesting and thoughtful chats. Please keep it going. So next, some housekeeping items. At this point, I'll turn it over to our technical consultant, Donna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. My name's Donna. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for being here today. I hope everyone is getting familiar with AirMeet, the platform that we're using. For those who's joining us for the first time today, feel free to reach out to anyone on our support team if you're experiencing any difficulties. You can just go to table 1 when you see the tables, or you can go to the People tab and search support, and you can message anyone on the team. And a reminder, if you can't see a video or if you can't hear a speaker, just first of all, just try refreshing your browser. And AirMeet is also best used on Chrome on a desktop or laptop. AirMeet also provides closed captioning in English. So under my video and Teresa's video, you'll see a button that says CC. You can click on that for English captions. If you do turn on closed captions on AirMeet, you'll only see the speaker that's currently speaking, so active speaker view. And then for captions in French or Chinese or any other language that you might need, we are using Wordly. So please take a look in the chat for the instructions on how to access translated captions. Our support team is also in the chat. If you have any questions or need any help, just let us know. And please note that Wordly is only available for the keynote and the plenary discussions, and that all sessions are being recorded and will be available to you at a later date. Great, I'll turn it back to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Donna. So I would also like to invite you to join our Leaders Summit group on Mighty Networks for updates and to continue the conversation with your fellow attendees after the summit. So check out the link in chat, please. For the next 2-3 minutes, I would like to cover the following items: the code of conduct and an active bystander mental health support. So as mentioned yesterday, the goal of our summit is to provide a safe space for everyone to have an open and deep dialogue. So in the program booklet that was sent out to you, we had indicated a set of guidelines. And you can, link it in the chat. And just want to remind you to be respectful of the speakers, the staff, the volunteers, and your fellow attendees. To ensure a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment for all attendees, we ask that you read through the guidelines in the program booklet if you haven't done so already. So in terms of active bystander and mental health support, we have people trained as active bystanders if you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or see that a participant is using harmful or offensive language. The team bystander effect, the term bystander effect refers to the phenomenon in which the greater the number of people present, the less likely people are to help a person in distress. So there are a number of reasons why this can occur, but one of the key observations is that the behavior of others strengthens the bystander effect if they remain passive. However, with others exhibit active reactions, thus bystander effect may be reduced. So therefore, an individual is more likely to help if someone else has initiated action. So an active bystander is a person who witnesses an emergency or power-based violence, recognizes it as such, and takes it upon themselves to do something about it. And there are specific methods that can be used to help de-escalate a situation and reduce harm. So as bystanders, we need to be especially vigilant and aware of what disrespect, harassment, racism, and hate violence look like in order to be able to stand up and intervene when people need it most. Please private chat Patty Pond or Howard Jang if you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or if you feel the group agreements or accountable spaces guidelines are not being respected. If you want to learn more about active bystander, I encourage you to check out the resources on Act 2 and Racism webpage. Now, I would like to introduce you to Patrick Chu, General Manager of Trico Group, who is a platinum sponsor of the Leaders Summit.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, and I'd like to now introduce, provide a bit of background about Patrick. So Patrick was born in Hong Kong and immigrated to Calgary as a child. Throughout his life, Patrick has had great exposure into the real estate industry, especially through his father and mother, Wayne Chu, founder and CEO, and Eleanor Chu, CFO of Trico Homes. Being part of the Trico Group, Patrick is also involved with the Trico Charitable Foundation. His involvement has been chairing on the new community board that provides networking, mentoring, and grants to community leaders within the social enterprise space. This aligns closely to the family values that have been set by Wayne and Eleanor. Patrick wishes to be the advocate for the Chu family and future generations. In his spare time, he enjoys playing soccer, badminton, basketball, visiting show homes, visiting new breweries, and visiting new countries, as well as volunteering at organizations such as Kids Cancer Care and In From the Cold, Mustard Seed, Ronald McDonald House, and many more. Turn it over to you now, Patrick.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here again for ACCT, and on behalf of the Trico Group, the Trico Foundation, and the Chu family, thank you very much for supporting this type of action that Teresa Wu Pao and her team has put forward to us now. Today is an interesting topic, and what are leadership needs and issues for younger Chinese Canadians? And for me, learning and understanding how my parents, Wayne and Eleanor Chu, have grown into the real estate business in Calgary, Alberta. And just to give you guys high level, it is a very old boys club. So they were already challenged as Chinese Canadians to be part of and becoming a leader in this space. And now to say almost nearly 30 years in business, we are now one of the top 5 in Calgary, and we finally have that seat at the table. But just as that experience share is, I saw that growing up as well, and seeing the struggles that both my parents had to face. Now, what the next generation and what me and my siblings are going to be doing now is how are we able to empower the new thinking and the new generation around social enterprise. And that's the work that we're doing at the foundation. And we're very, very blessed and fortunate to be able to do so. And the one statement that I would love to always make, and the family statement is doing well by doing good. If we could do well in business, then we could do good for the community around us as well. And I had the fortunate to actually read Tesicca's commission pieces prior to this, and I'm excited for everyone to actually listen to it and resonate to what she has spoken about. And I'm excited for today. And if anyone wants to network, just send me a message directly. So thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you, Patrick. And Trico Foundation has supported the summit since 2019, and we truly appreciate the fact that you believe in our vision and the work that we do. So, I'm sure that you enjoyed the day with us today. So at this point, I would like to turn our focus to younger Chinese Canadians and examine what are the leadership needs and issues for them, our topic for today. We have heard over and over again how important the voices of younger Chinese Canadians are, and it was the topic of discussion yesterday with the Prime Minister. I'm excited to be introducing our next speaker, who chose not to write a discussion paper to address this topic. And but I won't give away any, more. All I would say is the young Chinese Canadian is multi-talented. Tesicca Truong is the ministerial advisor for the BC Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. She is a community engagement innovator, a dialogue facilitator, and a serial change maker. Her passion lies at the intersection of youth empowerment, citizens engagement, and resilience building. She co-founded City Hives, a nonprofit on a mission to transform the way young people shape their cities and the civic processes that engage them. She also co-created the Vancouver Youth for TAP Coalition, a youth-led campaign led to the installation of new water fountains in every public high school in Vancouver, as well as the inaugural Vancouver School Board Sustainability Conference. Tesicca has served on the Mayor's Engaged City Task Force, BC's Climate Solutions in Clean Growth Advisory Council, the Simon Fraser University Senate, and as board chair of Sustainable SFU, now Embark SFU. For her work, she was awarded the President's Leadership in Sustainability Award from SFU and Vancouver's Greenest City Leadership Award. Tesicca has also been named Top 30 Under 30 and Top 25 Under 25 lists by Corporate Knights, North American Association for Environmental Education, and Starfish Canada. To facilitate this segment is Adrienne Wong, the artistic director of Spiderweb Show Performance, a company that interrogates the impact of digital disruption through art. Adrienne co-curates the Festival of Live Digital Art with Michael Wheeler and Sarah Garton Stanley. Her theater creation work straddles in-person and digital spaces. Her particular interests are in developing new work and using theater and engagement as a strategy to promote progressive change. She was the inaugural artist in residence for CBC Radio's Q. Landline, co-created with Dustin Harvey, toured nationally and internationally in French and English. Please join me in welcoming Tesicca and Adrienne.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, Teresa, and for that warm welcome.
It's so warm. It's always a strange thing to listen to people talk about you while you're on the screen. I don't know about you, Tesicca. Well, we're just people. So thank you for this really warm round of emojis. It's fantastic to be here and to be on this platform. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're up to because, as Teresa was saying, it's a little bit different than what you would have experienced yesterday. I come from the world of theater, and so it's not strange for me to kind of deviate from patterns. But what Tesicca has done when asked to write a white paper, she wrote some poetry. She wrote some amazing, full of feel. I'm not going to say too much because I don't want to spoil it. But so what we're going to do this morning, Tesicca is going to read the poems. She's going to perform the poems, and then I'm going to ask her some questions and start a conversation so that we can go deeper into the ideas and questions behind the writing. To me, this is so natural to use the arts and culture in a way to start to unearth some of the messy, tangled feelings and ideas and connections and disconnections in these big, complicated scenarios. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use our tools from arts and culture to kickstart some conversation. And then we're going to pass the mic over to you. So does that sound right, Tesicca? Is there anything I missed?
Yeah, no, I love that. We will have a panel following this as well, and then we will be inviting young folks from the audience if you want to speak up and share your stories after this as well, and you can do so with raised hands, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that after the poems.
Yes, and if you're wondering if you are youth if you're 40 or under in this. I don't know. Can you hear that? That's the train going by. I'm right by the train. Train drags and bam. So if you're 40 or under, start thinking, because we'll be calling on you. Okay. So I think those are all of our housekeeping things. Are you ready to dive in, Tesicca?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
Sounds good. The first poem is called Walk With Me. I am so tired of the anti-Asian racism, tired of living in fear, tired of the hate, tired of not being Canadian enough, of not being Asian enough, tired of being told to stay quiet, tired of being told to keep our heads down, while our humanity is being eroded, while our Black and Indigenous siblings of color are harmed, killed, while the world burns, our planet is plundered, while land, food, and people are disrespected, violated over and over again. The weight of silence, carried for generations on hunched backs, sealed lips, grin and bear it. But I can't stay silent anymore. The burden is too heavy to carry. I'm bursting at the seams, rage, grief, hurt, pain pouring out. My presence on Turtle Island, these stolen lands, is political. I'm the product of displacement, political instability, a child of immigrants and refugees, a silent settler, no more. Enough is enough. But I can't walk this path alone. Our elders have forged the path, crossed seas, built proud gates to welcome us home on unsurrendered lands, been spat on, shoved, driven out, paid the ultimate price. So come walk with me.
Thank you, Tesicca. One of my theater instructors told me a long time ago that having an emotional experience in public is a political act. You were commissioned to write a white paper. How did it come to be that these poems are what came out of you? And how are those connected to your objectives for today's session?
Well, I think it came out of a lot of grief, and I think grief that I wasn't acknowledging, especially after what happened in Atlanta, Georgia. I think I heard it on the news and I just compartmentalized it because I just so busy, didn't have the time to really wrestle with it. And it came in a moment of silence, in a slow, weeks later, in a slow period when I was trying to figure out how to wrestle with what I was feeling. And I realized that growing up in the way that we're raised is that, you don't often talk about what's unspoken, the hard things in life. My mom always says, we each have probably volumes and volumes of the hardships that we live through. And so that's why we don't talk about it, because we hold it back to protect it from others. But I wanted to question that a little and to peel back that layer and to say, what is the price of silence? What is the price of not talking about it? What is the cost to us personally, right? This mental health pandemic that we have across this country because of COVID, but I think because of many, many reasons as well. And so I wanted to write this piece in particular, really trying to articulate that grief as a place, as a resting place for other folks who might be feeling that way, and for folks who might, who aren't Asian or who might not understand, to try to understand what I was and what some of us might be going through. And I think when I got that invitation to write a white paper, I think for me, often English has been a language. It's a language of work. It's a language of school. It's always a language that has been very logical, linear. And I think the emotions and the thoughts that I was wrestling with weren't, right? I needed a space that was divergent, right? That was generative, as opposed to convergent and precise, because I wanted to create space for reflection for others as well, to reflect upon your experiences as Chinese Canadians on these unceded lands. And I hope that there's pieces of it that will resonate with all of you, and I hope that there are pieces that don't, and that challenge your assumptions, or that you have a completely different experience as well, because there is no homogenous Chinese Canadian experience. It's actually, we each have a different experience and different stories that we carry with us.
You talk about this space of reflection, and that's how today's session is going to be structured too, so that here we are in the keynote, you're sharing your poetry, your perspectives, we're talking a little bit about the ideas behind it, and then we're going to widen the circle out to hear the stories and reflections from our panelists, and then even wider out to hear the stories and reflections from the youth leaders who are here today. So if you're listening to these poems and it's sparking memories or it's sparking reflections for you in the audience, then please jot it down, make a note, because there is going to be space today for you to share those thoughts and reflections, those personal experiences with the wider group. And especially because of today's focus on youth, we'll be prioritizing those voices. Do you want to add anything to that, Tesicca? I want to make sure I present it accurately.
No, that's lovely. I think the one piece I wanted to add is that this invitation is really about, I think, linking back to the session yesterday around challenging white supremacy. I think one thing that I always want to try is how do we de-hierarchize? How do we, move away from that that model of a sage on the stage, one or a couple people that know everything and that, they're the ones pouring into empty cups. And to reframe that, to realize that we all have knowledge, we all have experience, we all have so much to share and so much to give. And it's not just me, but I think so many of us that have share an opportunity to really gift that to each other today in this session. And so I invite you to think about, what is it that you'd like to gift to us all today? What's that message? And we'll have, I hope, an opportunity to delve further into that.
Well, on that note, on this idea of gifts, let's move to the next poem. We could talk, I feel like we could talk for hours, but we only have 20 minutes total. So I'm going to move you to the next poem, which is called Liminal Generation.
Okay. We are known as bananas, yellow on the outside, white on the inside, battered around until brown and bruised. We're the translators, our heritage lost in translation, mother tongue stunted and shamed, fluent in code switching. We're the third culture kids, happas, mixed, halfies, hyphens. We're not half this, half that, but already whole. We're the bridges between Middle Earth and Turtle Island, tying cultures together, stretched thin across the chasm, trying to weave worlds apart together. We suffer in silence, as we've been taught to choke down the bitterness. No sweetness without hardship. We are rootless, carried on the currents of time, searching for an anchor, a boat to belong home.
Thank you, Tesicca. This poem really, to me, connects with that idea of youth, of emerging voices, emerging leaders. Can you tell me a little bit, in your experience, what are some of the challenges that emerging leaders are facing?
Yeah, I think this poem really, for me, articulates like the challenge of growing up with a foot in multiple worlds, right? With a foot growing up in Canadian culture, but also rooted in our family, our home culture, our home life, and trying to honor the values of both and to live life along the integrity of both of those. And that's a challenge, I think, for leadership as well, right? Is how do you exist in a Canadian society, in a white supremacist society, in a patriarchal society, but also while trying to challenge and disrupt and trying to figure out what's that line that we can walk to pick, actually, to gather what are the best pieces of each culture, right? How do we celebrate the parts that are beautiful, that are needed, but also to discard, I think, some of the old ways of thinking, right? That might have been useful at a certain time, but are no longer useful to us. Yeah, and I think it's just articulating for a lot of us growing up in Canada or who have moved to Canada at a young age, trying to balance those values and those experiences, right? Honoring our parents, filial piety, really respecting our elders, and but also trying to exist and to adapt to Canadian society.
You talk about this feeling of rootlessness. And being unanchored. And I'm curious about what rootedness would feel like to you.
I think complete belonging, a sense of being able to bring our full selves into this world without fear of judgment of the folks around. Just complete acceptance.
I have a friend who works a lot in disability justice and disability arts, and she talks about radical pluralism and just this, that everything is allowed, like everything is allowed to thrive and grow and be in its fulsome self.
Yeah.
In its messiness.
Yeah. When I do facilitation, I think we talk about it as spaciousness, right? Just allowing people in as many ways as possible to show up and to participate, and not to kind of have a narrow view of what participation looks like or what showing up looks like.
Well, so narrow views is an excellent segue, actually, because the next poem, I'm Not Yours, has a lot to do with how folks see you. Can you read that for us now?
Yeah. I'm not yours to fetishize, to project your sick and twisted vanities, demure, submissive bullshit. I'm not yours to assume meek because of my stature, to presume voiceless because of my softness, to judge as naive because of my care, my unwillingness to deceive, to mistake my silent rage as agreement, as consent. I'm hurting and healing. I'm not yours to call too Canadian or to deem not Canadian enough, to question my intelligence because of an accent, clues to my connection to culture. I'm not yours to claim in your multicultural tapestry a trophy emblematic of your diversity, your generosity to include, to assuage your white guilt, to placate the marches swelling in the streets. I'm not yours, not a pawn to pit against one another, model minority used to divide and conquer. We're not yours, not your Indigenous people, not your land. I'm not yours to define, to refine, to unwind, to remind. I'm not here to defy. I'm just here to be, to explore, to be free. Let me go. Let me be. I'm not yours.
Thank you, Tesicca. This one, I feel so much resonance with that. The labels or the assumptions that folks hold around others, and how we, on so many different levels, are trying to like just be ourselves. I was thinking the other day, like, I don't want to be better. I just want to be more me. Like, it's not about being better. It's just like, how can I radically accept myself when I don't feel radically accepted inside of my community, our world right now. There's something that really stands out for me here, though. I can relate to that idea of being told I'm not Canadian enough because of whatever way I look or where I live. But what do you mean when you say too Canadian? You say, I'm not yours to call too Canadian or to deem not Canadian enough. Talk to me a little bit about this too Canadian thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it speaks to bridging the worlds, right? Because in one direction, you're not Canadian enough. And being too Canadian comes from the other direction, right? Where you've lost connection to Chinese culture, where you don't speak the language as well. Your Chinese is broken, and you don't know all the customs and what's polite and what's not. And so it feels like you're stepping on eggshells sometimes in both directions, because there's all this that you don't know about Canadian culture. And there's also all of this that you can be unintentionally rude, right? Unintentionally disrespectful, just because we weren't taught, right? That we grew up. I feel like I grew up in a surrogate Chinese and surrogate Vietnamese culture, but there's pieces that I picked up and there's pieces that I'm completely unaware of. So that's a piece that speaks to it.
It's it makes sense though that I wouldn't pick up on that, because I feel like inside of that binary, which we all know binaries are dangerous, that I would be too Canadian. I don't have any Chinese language, don't really have any cultural customs that have been passed down to me. And so a lot of my grief around culture and identity comes from the loss of those connections, the loss of that knowledge and understanding of where I have come from. And that's because of where my dad wanted to come from or how he wanted to be in the world and what felt possible for him at that time. So it's hard. I can't really blame him, but it does feel like a loss that I had no control over.
Well, I think that's what this poem speaks to, right? Is that I think we have an idea of what a Chinese Canadian person should look like, or we've been told to be a good Chinese Canadian daughter or son or child, right? And similarly, my father never taught me Vietnamese. He sent me to French immersion school, right? And I think that's really to assimilate so much, right? But it's also because for him, as someone who grew up, with imperfect English, which is perfection is a characteristic of white supremacy anyways. But he he was so limited, right? And he was made to feel small. He was ashamed. He was, didn't have access to work and all these different things. And so he just was trying to set me up for a better and for a different life, right? But I think it's also like there's the cost to that as well, right? As we talk about. And I think this poem is really trying to help, at least for myself, and I hope for folks listening, help us rid ourselves of those, those expectations and those judgments about where we're at and how we're supposed to be as a Chinese Canadian, that we're enough regardless of our language skills, regardless of our connection and knowledge to culture. We're enough already as is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also went to French immersion school. And my mom, who's French Canadian, wanted to send us to Chinese school. And by this point, my parents had separated, and my sisters and I were just adamantly against it because we were in French immersion school, and we were really the only Asian kids there. And to feel different, I don't know, when you're a kid, you don't really want to feel different.
Yeah.
And you without kind of that real support. And I don't know, like that, we just didn't talk about those things. I don't know if anybody's family talked about those things at the time, but our family did not.
No, I think so many of our families don't.
It's the French too. It's not just the Chinese. Nobody wants to talk about anything important. Okay. But we do. We want to talk about important things today. So I want to move, as much as I would love to keep talking, I want to move to Things I Only Partially Understand, which is the title of the fourth poem today.
Yeah, I think it flows really well from our conversation. Here's how it goes. Things I only partially understand. To save face. But at what cost? What is the price of silence? To eat bitterness. To taste sweetness until we choke. Respect our elders. But how about our youth? Can we earn respect without the sands of time? A spider's web of family ties, spun tighter than silk. Does the tightening knot choke? Blood runs thicker than water. But how deep are the cuts? When is filial piety too much? Gold Mountain, Gum San, a better life. Where is home, really?
Oh, where is home? Okay, so this poem feels like it holds so many disconnections, right? Or like these ideas that don't quite line up. What are these disconnections for you? Are they generational? Is it intercultural? Is it something else entirely?
I think it's all of those pieces, right? The intersections of it, of like what we've been taught and really questioning it. And I think that's the reason why I wanted to end off on this poem, was to really look at the things that have been passed on to us, examine them, see the value of them, but also to question their limitations and to figure out, what is it that we're keeping with us and what is it that we're discarding, and that might harm us actually, right? If we don't examine and question, right? I think too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right? And so I think there's value to saving face, right? And to upholding honor. But at what cost is it, where you don't speak about any of these pieces, Adrienne, as you talked about, in your family, where, my father he was in the Vietnam War, and then in concentration camps, and then escaped to Vietnam as, the boat people, and in refugee camps, and then came over, and he doesn't talk a lot about that, right? And I know that it's because he wants to protect me. He wants to shield me from some of those things, right? I never grew up thinking that, I'm the daughter of a veteran, because he never felt broken to me. But I think it's because he hid it so well, right? He shielded myself and my family from it, right? But I think that last piece about where's home really, it's, I've grown up on these unceded territories, right, of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. But I'm very conscious that I'm a settler, and not necessarily a settler by choice, right? There's challenge and choice. And And displacement is real, right? That political instability pushed us here, right? And colonization in other parts of the world, right? It's all connected. But it's in those moments of racism, right, where people immediately like try to speak to you in Chinese, or try to relate just on a cultural thing, like, oh, I've been to China once, or, you know, like whatever that is. And it's those small moments that feel like the big moments, because it makes you question. You're like, is this really home? Like, you know, you feel othered in that moment, right? Where people automatically make assumptions and presume things and place their judgments on you, right? And I think the piece I just want to end off is like on that racism is often this poverty of imagination, right? That they're unable to imagine, myself or yourself, for so many of us, beyond what our exterior skin looks like, right? Beyond all these things that I can't change, you know, the race that I was born, you know, gender, age, like all of these characteristics that you're just, this is who you are in the world at this point, right? But that poverty of imagination is really that piece I want to leave you with, because it's not on you, it's on them, right? It's their poverty of imagination. So how do you define yourself on your own terms, right? Free yourself from how people's perceptions of you as much as possible, and walk in the world as you are. And that's enough.
Thank you, Tesicca. I mean, that for me really brings it back to the keynote yesterday, and that notion that racism places the word racism places the blame on the other, on the race, the racialized body, on the racialized person, whereas white supremacy is the problem is holding up this idea of whiteness as the ideal, and that so many of our structures and policies have grown out of ways to maintain that power dynamic. And for me, it really does. Like, I remember sitting on a diversity panel saying, like, is this just really simple? Either you're for white supremacy or you're against it. Like, there's not a kind of, yeah, I'm kind of pregnant. No, you're either pregnant or you're not. You're either like, anyhow. So we've come to the end of our time today, Tesicca, with that, you know, really powerful reminder of where the focus is and can be. And I'm curious, as we move into sharing and hearing some of the stories from our wider community today, what are you listening for?
I think just honesty. Right? I'm listening for, and I'm hoping that the panel after this and youth leaders in the audience, young folks who are willing to share, right, with that vulnerability. Like, what is that? What are those stories that you've carried that are so heavy that you just don't want to carry anymore? And how can we rest ourselves here and leave them here, right? Share them so we have this collective witnessing, this collective holding of each other, right? And this grief and this rage and this, like, let's be real with the emotions that we've suppressed, right? But I'm also hoping that in the second part of the session, we have that opportunity to then pivot, right? And to mark, like, this is collective healing that's happening here, right? This feeling of like, oh, we're not isolated. There are common experiences and commonalities, and that's the symptoms of white supremacy, right? That's the symptoms of this racism and sexism and ageism and all these pieces that we experience. But that then we can dream forward. I think that second part of the session I'm really excited for is like, okay, and what is the world that we want to create then together? What is this common vision that we want to dream, right? And then what is the piece that we can each individually play? But I think in this moment, just being real with ourselves and being real with each other, and, you know, what are the stories that we've never been able to share with our parents or our grandparents that you wish they knew?
All right. Well, on that, I'm going to hand it over to the panelists, and I'm going to introduce them. But I'm going to introduce them very briefly because Tesicca and I stole their intro time to talk more about the poems. But, you know, it was Sandra's idea. Okay. So Councillor Sandra Yeung Racco is going to be your chair of the next coming panel. All of these panelists are wonderful, accomplished, smart, brilliant people, and you can read their bios online. Evan Hu is the founding principal of Alto Sante. Vivian Kwan is the board chair for the Center for Race and Culture. And Albert Wong is a citizenship judge who presides over citizenship ceremonies in the Greater Toronto area. Welcome, Councillor. I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrienne, and thank you, Tesicca. I mean, all I can say is wow to what we have just heard. It's so touching. It really resonates, I think, with everyone. And even though I don't fit into the 40 and under youth category, but I can still tell you that it resonates with me. It brings me back to what I experienced when growing up in Canada and how it has revolved over the years. But before I go into what I want to talk about, I think I want to hear from my panelists here as well. We have some really great panelists here with us, Vivian and Evan and Albert. And you can all read their bios in the, within the website there. So I'm not going to go into that. I don't want to waste the time to do that. So I'm going to go, first going to go to Vivian. She is the youngest out of all of us. So Vivian, tell us a bit about, what are your feelings after listening to these poems, and what is some of your story and what you have experienced?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I really want to say is, I've seen Tesicca's poems beforehand when we were prepping for the panel, but wow, just hearing her perform them in person was so much more powerful than I can imagine. And it really made me connect back to a lot of my own memories growing up. So I was born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta, and my parents were first generation immigrants. And I think over the years growing up, I went through bilingual school. So I studied Mandarin Chinese and English growing up. So it was kind of an interesting experience trying to still keep in touch with my culture while learning through a different Western school system. So growing up was kind of interesting trying to navigate both. And it kind of made me feel like there's a lot of questions to what my identity really is, because I'm trying to maintain the part of Chinese in me while still trying to absorb and integrate into the society, which my parents think that I should be integrated in because they weren't able to be fully integrated. And I think recently, with the whole issue with anti-Asian hate and racism on the rise, it prompted us to really reflect back more on history with Chinese Canadians and also conversations within my family, and made me realize how much we didn't really have that conversation as a family about intergenerational experiences. My parents never really talked about their own experience coming to Canada. And when I asked them about how it was back in the days, because I knew how bad it was back in the days for immigrants, especially if you're of ethnic background, they just minimize it and said that it wasn't so bad. But I would hear stories like my uncle getting beat up in junior high school and he never went back to school. Or when my partner, he's Japanese, and his family used to live in internment camps. And his story was one of his uncles almost got hung on a tree by a bunch of white neighbors. But if it wasn't for an owner nearby to save him, he would have been dead. But those stories to them, the only thing they would say is actually not that bad. So it really made me question a lot. And I think something so intimate that you're supposed to find out within your own family, finding out through let's say open resources or through somebody else, it was kind of hard to, I guess, embrace that feeling, because it's something that you would think you would share more intimately within your family, but then you find out through school or you find out through a third party. So it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And because of that, I think there's so much conversations and dialogues that need to be had in our communities. And I think the pandemic really gave rise to the opportunity to speak about race issues like never before. So I'm so excited to see where the momentum's going to take us and where these conversations are going to go.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. And I totally agree with you. I think that that conversation really needs to take place. We have never really been having that conversation. We always hide behind what we are feeling rather than expressing it out. So thank you, Vivian, for that. I'm going to go to Evan. Evan, tell us a bit about your experience growing up. And I remember when we met earlier, you did say that you were all over the place. You've lived all over, including Toronto. I understand that. So tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the complexity of our community deeply, and I think we're not one homogenous, which we're stereotyped as clearly because people see our face, and that's it, right? And all of us, like my family story is extremely unique by many standards, as Shanghainese Canadians that didn't speak the dialect that everyone else spoke. And I didn't actually understand this as a child. Everyone's speaking Cantonese, and I said, how come I can't understand them? Right. And then I discovered we're not even speaking Mandarin in our family. We're speaking Chinese Wu dialect. Right. I didn't figure that out till I was 15 years old. Right. And so there's no I could share, like, there were no ties in the sense that I lived in Kingston, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Toronto, Edmonton, all these Canadian cities. We moved around a fair bit. So it's hard to put down roots on the top of the fact that you're always the perpetual outsider. So, as a child, you're on the playground and they don't know you. You go to a new school and they pick you last every time, and you can feel the hurt going through you, but they don't notice you, right? So, and then you get that mixed message from your parents, who you only realize as adults of their own burdens that they've got and their own complexity, right? And I mean, talking to other Asian Canadians, and whether Vietnamese or Chinese or Japanese Canadians, they all have their own stories that they had realizations. Because I forget which speaker talked about, as a child I oversimplified things. I just wanted to fit in. I think it was Adrienne that mentioned I just want to fit in, and so I had that whammy of moving around, wanting to fit in, no role models. So when I was a kid, the only role models I realized that were there, and as a young Chinese male, were Bruce Lee. Right. Normie Kwan, the football player, like the only Chinese Canadian athlete I could find. No one in the NHL. No one played baseball that I was aware of. Right. Strangely enough, Bruce Carradine, who played the main lead in Kung Fu. Right. But he wasn't even Chinese. Right. White guy. Right. So, yeah, I mean, those are the struggles. And I didn't have groups like, the ACCT. There was kind of the Chinese Benevolent Society kind of, Saturdays you get together and they show movies, and the diaspora would get together speaking in like 18 different dialects. And I didn't really want to be there because I wanted to be with my friends, right? And which were all the, my friends. I mean, I mainly grew up with white Canadians, right? So you get in very diverse. I don't know how my story fits in with everyone else, right? And but growing into it, I became more and more aware, and I became very unhappy with being put in this place, because I think, again, like to share the same thing. I just want to be me, and I carried the burden of my father, who was essentially exiled, right? So I think I shared in the early networking room that my father fought on the side of the KMT in the Civil War as a draftee, basically literally grabbed and stuck in a truck and sent to the front, then running afoul of the KMT in Taiwan. So there's no going back for our family. We knew that. Like, there was no going back to the mainland. There was no going back to Taiwan. So we were here to stay. And I knew there was that burden on him, and we didn't talk much about it. So I'm rambling a little because the story goes, and I got to say one last thing. My understanding has been changing over the years. So I'm not the same person when I was 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever. And I'm starting to understand more and more. And I'm glad we're having these conversations, because the sharing, I think, is really important. And especially of the younger generation, a lot of them do not know what has transpired in the past, right? So it's time to bring that. Like, none of us, I'm sure everyone that went through Canadian schooling here, we learned nothing in school about Chinese Canadians. We might have learned that we built the railroad, maybe. But, the immigration, anti-immigration acts, the internment of the Japanese were never even talked about, right? Let alone our stories. So, yeah.
No, and thank you, Evan. And you know what, I can relate to what you're saying, because I do agree with you that it's been difficult growing up here, especially if you came over at an early, the early years. We didn't anyway have any support, any type of groups like we do now. There's many more association groups that can help us. Back then, there was nobody. You couldn't turn to anybody to talk to anybody about anything, really. So thank you for sharing that. That's really good. Albert, my good friend Albert, and you certainly have seen a lot, and you've also, being an immigrant, a citizenship judge, you see so many of these people that have come over and their struggles and what they have gone through. So, and yourself. So tell us a bit about what you went through.
Thank you, Sandra, and good morning, everyone. Let me first, if you don't mind, begin by saying that I'm speaking to you from the city of Victoria, and it's located in the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Litwugan and the Waisaish nations. I do that not only because it's polite, but it's now my way of saying to myself where I am in space. And if you don't mind, I also want to talk about what Tesicca has just done. I first met Tesicca in 2019 with her friends, and at a 2019 summit, and the youth stole the summit. And when Tesicca spoke then, she made me cry in 2019, because she showed me a window for me to understand my daughters, that they had a foot in different worlds. I never understood that. And now, no, somebody's not cutting onions beside me. I'm crying again. So thank you, Tesicca. If you read my bio, you see a lot of firsts. I was the first in this, I was the first in that, and 39 years in the military. But I will tell you also that every step of the way, I was challenged. When I first signed up with the military, recruited in the military, unbeknownst to me, the recruiters took a poll and voted me the first to fail. And later on, when I was in Afghanistan, it was a tragedy where a Canadian diplomat was killed by an improvised explosive device. And the government needed to retrench. The government of Canada needed to retrench and examine the threat against diplomats and aid workers in Kandahar. But to preserve the program, they decided to send a military officer down there. And I was chosen to go to Kandahar and take over as the acting director of aid in Kandahar. Immediately, my teammates rejected that vocally in front of me, saying that they were better than I was and that they should have been the one that was chosen. And my boss supported them and sent a message to Ottawa saying, Wong should not be the one, so-and-so should be the one. And you should let me choose who should go to do this work. And back and forth, many emails went back and forth. And finally, General Rick Hillier, who was the Chief of Defense Staff at that time, sent a message through his EA, and it basically said, from General Hillier, Wong is the only one, period. But what it does when you're in every step of the way, in all my firsts, someone had stepped up and challenged why I was chosen. But what it does is it drives you underground. It makes you work harder. It makes you work quieter. It tells you not to challenge the status quo and to be thankful for what you have and don't ask for anything more. So what Tesicca has done today is give me a voice, the recognition that her first poem, I'm Tired. What I realized when I listened to it, not read it, but listened to her say it, I realized I was tired, but I didn't even know I was tired. So that's what this meant to me today.
Thank you, Albert. Yeah, no, I agree. And I know that, especially at the time when you were into the military, I think that whole philosophy at that time was just so, if I can call, white supremacy. It wasn't like you weren't part of that group. Like they don't see you as part of them. They don't see you as an equal, and that is it's unfortunate and it's disappointing. But that was reality. That was what it was, right, Albert? And you know, with all this and with listening to Tesicca's poem, it takes me back to when I first came over. So I came over, you know, as a kid with my parents. So I am a first generation here. But when I came over, I can tell you, in our neighborhood, there was only 3 families that were Chinese, if you want to call it. We were the only first generation. Everybody else was like 4th and 5th generations. So I lived through racism, if you want to call it. I lived through it every single day. We get picked on. I get picked on. I remember I used to bring a little a lunchbox, you know, a metal lunchbox to school. That is, and people think it was some sort of transmitter radio to China, and they would take it, they would throw it around and everything. So we get picked on, but then we basically just continue on, because we were often reminded by our parents that we came over, we sacrificed to come over to give you a better life. That was what it was ingrained into us, saying that. And so, you know, we shouldn't rock the boat. We shouldn't cause any problem. Just study hard, do well, and be accomplished. That was what was sort of drilled into our minds. So we all do that. We try to do, we won't speak up. We won't say anything. We just continue. If somebody pushes you, somebody pick a fight on you, you just continue doing that. And I still remember my brother, he was sent to a private school, you know, early on, where there were no Chinese. He was the only one. And because he was the only Chinese, he got picked on every day. They would put things in his bed. They would do all sorts of things just to, and the only way he could, it was almost like they need you to prove that you are who you are. He had to fight the person. He actually had to be in that fight, and he won that fight. Then all of a sudden he earned the respect, you know? And it's crazy why we have to do that in order to earn respect from the people that you live with, the people that you're surrounded by. I know that I was lucky, or we were all lucky, because we are from a very musical family, and we are very accomplished musicians. And because of that, and the principal in my public school recognized my music ability, he would take me around to all the various events. And because of that, then my classmates and people around actually started noticing and giving me respect. But why do I have to do that in order to get the respect? Why can't I be just like every other kid and get that same respect? And I think that's where I think we have a real issue when we were growing up, or when I was growing up. I felt that it is almost like, you know, so the question is like, are you Canadian enough? And how are you Canadian? Is it by not you know, dropping your cultural identity? Then you can become Canadian, you get accepted? Or can we include that cultural identity to be Canadian? You know, I think what we want is, we don't want to fail. We don't want to be, and the problem is we get judged. We get judged by the color of our skin. We get judged by the way we look. We get judged by the way we speak. That's unfortunate. And we need to, I think really we need to stop judging everybody, including the kids. We're adults. We cannot judge our kids either. We need to give them the respect and allow them to voice their concerns and be open. And we need to listen. We really need to open our ears and listen. And I think that's the biggest thing that we all have to do as adults, as kids, as anybody. You know, in my role as a politician, that is what I need to do. I need to listen to my constituents. It doesn't matter whether they're young, they're old, whoever they are, we need to listen. And we need to really be sincere about listening. Not just say we're listening, but actually sincere, listen and understand. So this has been a great session, but I know that there's time limits. So I think I am going to call back Tesicca and Adrienne so that they can come in and sort of like speak to some of the youth and share some of their stories. So I'm going to turn it back over to Adrienne and Tesicca. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much to the panel. I think we'll wait a couple moments for Adrienne to join us as well, but just for sharing your stories so openly. And I think some of that was probably hard for us to hear and hard to share. But what a gift, what a gift. And I hope that you feel witnessed and seen.
Many, many years ago, I wrote a play that was inspired by my family's story, which is and isn't different than a lot of family stories that we're hearing today around separation and long periods of in separation because of exclusionary laws. When my grandfather came over, he was 15 years old, and then he returned to China, married, came back and was working, but then by that point he wasn't able to bring his family to Canada, and then eventually remarried in Canada and had a family that included my father, and my dad's family didn't know until one day someone knocked on the door that there was this whole other family in China, and that they were, and I think that really disrupted as you can imagine, their sense of family and who they are and who their father was and where they belonged. Growing up in Calgary as the only Chinese kids in the area, and so I wrote a play about that because it was important to me to tell these stories. It was important to me to find a way to share our history in a way that the audience, the viewers could resonate with it, could feel it, could understand it in a way that's not just about words and paper and statistics, although those are also very compelling. And then my parents met in Calgary, and then here my sisters and we're mixed race, and we have that distance from our Chineseness because of my dad's distance that he put in between himself and his Chineseness, and then navigating that gap like you're talking about. Anyhow, now I have kids, and they're even further away from their Chineseness, and it's just very, 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 very odd to walk around with your baby and people ask you if you're his mom, or if you're the nanny. I was like, no, this is my kid. Are you sure? Well, I'm pretty sure. Were you there at the birth? I was like, yes, I was there at the birth, and this is my son, and I remember that happening to my mom too, where people would say, those are your kids? Or her sitting in the hallway and at parent-teacher interviews, and the teacher coming out and looking for a Chinese face and not finding one and calling the next person. Like all of those assumptions that people make. And so this call for us to see each other, to meet each other where we're at, like right now, I hear that call in so many circles of advocates and activists, in the disability circle, in the mental health circle. Like, let's just meet each other where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'm just getting chills from, I don't know, I can't imagine that, and to have to encounter that over and over with your own children.
It is. I am really curious to think about and consider what is the way forward. How do I, here in this bubble that is Banff, where there's not a strong Chinese Canadian community that I've found, maybe it's me and Lily down the street. Some people have left, but how do we hold this? How do we share traditions? I make the noodles, I'll make the dumplings, but also my knowledge is incomplete. So that changing notion of Chinese is also a changing thing, and it's dynamic. And now, I do really want to hear some of the stories from the attendees and youth who are here, because this storytelling is part of healing. This storytelling does lay the foundation for moving forward when we hear each other and understand that there is no shame in our stories. These are our stories. These are the things that make us us, and these are the things that make our community. And by sharing them, we're only gaining more strength and solidarity.
Yeah, I just wrote in the chat, this is our truth, right? Our truth has to be heard for the healing and for the hoping as well. So our invitation is, and I've seen some folks already share in the chat, but if there are some brave folks who want to raise their hands, it's just, you can do so, and we invite you to share your stories. We don't have a lot of time, but I invite you to be spacious and to share what is it that you feel like needs to be heard. And I think I see William joining us already. So thank you. Thank you for those who are stepping up already, and thanks for those who will be.
Thank you, Tesicca, and thank you, Adrienne. Yeah, that was really, really impactful. And when I think about kind of these experiences growing up, I think about how diverse the experiences are as well. I know yesterday in our group chats, saw with some folks in more rural communities or in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, I think the experience would be very, very different from those of us in Vancouver, Toronto, and here in Edmonton. I remember growing up, first being the only Chinese kid in up until grade 3, and how that experience was, and being asked almost every other day if how to pronounce even just your last name. They're like, so how do you say your last name? And kids could just never seem to get it right. From the small things to that, like that, to bugging me about math class, and maybe I could have loved that my teacher back then, but the kids would always look over and try to copy my answers in math class, assuming I was always right, and I wasn't always right. From that to kind of how lucky I was to make a switch in grade 3 to a bilingual program in a school where all of a sudden I was a part of the majority. And that's how this feels right now, coming into this space today, is how kind of needed these spaces are. And one line that I really loved about your poem, Tesicca, was when you talked about us as the translators, but how really the most fluency we have is in, I think you said, code switching. And one thing I've been challenging myself with over the past few years is, maybe I realized maybe I wasn't so good at code switching. In the Chinese community, sometimes you're speaking up too much when you're not expected to. When I was on the board at the U of A, the board chair would nudge me after the first 2 meetings and said, "We want to hear from you more. Speak up more. Be the first to put up your hand." And I think even in code switching, as we jump from one circle to the other, how do we have these conversations with our, let's say, the leadership at the different tables, and have them better understand, perhaps what our preferences are, and really listening to how we want to be heard, and how we want to present ourselves at the table. So I think the expectations are pretty strong for us, both in mainstream communities and in the cultural communities. But I think one thing that's been really, really enriching, I think, for myself as a younger Chinese Canadian, was to actively participate in both of those communities and really understand those differences. And I think it's been a really enriching part just to understand that cultural piece one layer deeper than others that just get to experience it at home.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that.
It looks like there are some hands raised, so I think we're going to be hearing some more stories here.
Welcome, Bo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bo. I am a Chinese immigrant settler here, living in MSG Waskagan in Edmonton. I'm also a community. I'm a community organizer. I work with a collective called The Hue, which is a QT BIPOC oriented, justice oriented community collective here in Edmonton. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about something. Oh, so first, before I start, I just wanted to say like a big thank you to folks who like put on this event during the pandemic, as well as everyone who spoke, Adrienne, Tesicca, and all the plenary speakers as well. I just really appreciated kind of the vulnerability and the intentionality that folks came into these spaces of sharing these stories, because they can be so challenging and can be so, it can be such emotional labor to kind of provide these stories and narratives of our lives. And I just wanted to, really quickly say a great thank you for even just setting that space and paving that foundation a little bit. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something that really stuck out to me during Tesicca's poem, when we talked about this idea of rootedness and being connected to this idea of being able to come into spaces as our full selves, and how that plays in terms of our identity as, Asian, Chinese, Canadians. And I really want to very intentionally bring in the piece of intersectionality within this conversation, because I think like growing up, so like I said, I'm an immigrant settler. I moved here when I was 6, and when you move here, there's this whole idea, like people tell you like it's so multicultural, so accepting. You kind of buy into this idea, and you do see, folks like in my community. I lived first in downtown, and there were definitely folks, from different backgrounds. But as I aged and moved into junior high and high school, I started to identify, these microaggressions of racism and the different challenges that I experienced as an Asian person that other folks didn't. And as I saw that, it was interesting because I moved from downtown to a more affluent community, and a lot of what I saw was this model minority narrative being played out, and this internalized shame of a lot of the Asian folks around me that became an internalized shame that I participated in, of trying to be this model minority, trying to be as white as we can. And it was very challenging for me. And later on, as I shifted into an area where I wanted to more so embrace my culture, my identity, I found that to be very challenging as well. I am queer, and I am a non-binary individual, and I will have to say, like, something that we talked about is this code switching, right, and being able to exist in spaces fully as yourself. I have found that to be pretty much non-existent for me in most of my life. In the queer community, there's a lot of racism, so I'm shedding or downplaying a lot of that within that community. And then within the Chinese community that I've been a part of, I grew up in church, and I've attended a lot of the events. There can be a lot of homophobia, transphobia. So then I'm downplaying that side of my identity as well. I'm 27 now, and I only just came out to my mom last year. So, because there was so much fear and there were so many challenges there. And so this idea of shedding your identity, always checking a part of who you are as you navigate these spaces, it has been really difficult, and it has been really harmful in terms of just like being able to be a full human being and being embraced for who I am as a person. And to be honest, like at this point, like I consider myself very lucky, because I do have a community that I'm a part of, a family that I'm a part of, a collective that I'm a part of that has so many queer Asian folks. And, we engage in our community care, and we engage in our activism. And that may, like, some of the practice that we engage in may seem radical or it may seem aggressive, but it's what we have to do. It's what we have to do to keep ourselves safe. It's what we have to do to keep ourselves alive, because we don't have that space anywhere else. And I used to work as a political staffer, and I used to attend with my, at the time I was a cabinet minister, I used to attend with them often, events in the Chinese community. And when I would attend them, it really brought this, like I felt really, like I remember just watching this lion dance and just tears just coming out, because I felt so disconnected from my culture and like the foundation of who I am. And at that point, I really decided, like, there's such a great yearning in me to be connected to my culture, our traditions that speak to who we are, the legacy of work and activism and resiliency that our elders and our ancestors have brought forward. But I feel so disconnected from it, because I feel that my queerness and my gender identity so often prohibits me from being embraced and loved in these communities. So I think, when we talk about going forward, I do think that there is I love the conversation we're having. And I think that there is work to be done in terms of examination of ourselves. And, whether it be white supremacy or homophobia, whatever that internalized, hegemonic, harmful narratives that we have built, and how to embrace, members of our community. Like, so many people that I organize with are Asian or Pacific Islanders or, East Asian, South Asian folks who are queer. And we share so much of same experiences, like these obstacles of being able to connect with our roots, our community. And so many of us yearn so much to be part of that. And I think it really does require work of, folks like us who are doing that work on the ground, but also folks who already exist in those communities to kind of do some self-examination and do some reflective work of how do we create these spaces and how do we challenge, some of the harmful practices that we've oftentimes had to utilize to survive, right? We had to engage in these because these were methods of survival for them. And, but as we move on beyond survival to now flourishing and embracing ourselves, what does that work look like? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share, that's kind of my story, but I really wanted to speak to, what Tesicca shared and just bring this idea of intersectionality and what that looks like for the Asian community. And I think, yeah, it's a really great conversation to have, and I'm really happy to be able to, share with some folks. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bo, for that.
Yeah, thank you.
For sharing so openly and honestly. And it's hard, I think it's hard to be queer, but also I think nested within, being the Chinese Canadian culture. So thank you for that.
Before we hear from Abigail, I just want to drop in a reminder that we're hearing from youth voices right now. We're sharing some stories, and that to let you know that if we don't get to all of the stories this morning, that there will be another opportunity a little later in the session to hear more voices. I just want to drop in that reminder as we start. This is the kind of thing where you start to hear other people's experience. You go like, oh yeah, this happened to me or that happened to me, and we start to really want to share. So Abigail, nice.
Hi, well, it's nice to meet you as well. I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who's spoken, and I feel quite nervous now talking after Bo, because that was quite beautiful to hear, and I feel like I should give a shout out to William. He really convinced me to be here, and I'm very grateful. I was actually born and raised by a Canadian couple. I was born in Russia, and I grew up there until the age of 8 with a missionary family, and then moved to Canada, to rural Alberta, to a place called Penhold, Alberta. And I think, these last couple of years, I've really started searching and learning more about my Asian heritage, because things that have really struck me are I've seen the things going on in the world, but I have never had the chance to really understand them, because I have a very white name, and I have white parents, and I don't have an accent. And I never felt like I was equipped to have these conversations or to be able to explore these things, because most of my friends were white. And even growing up, I don't think I saw the first person of color until I was about 10 years old. And it really opened my world to realize, that I wasn't alone. And I think I've long struggled. I'm so sorry, I'm getting emotional. But I just wanted to say thank you to Adrienne, because I feel like you're right. We need to share our stories more, and we need to be more vulnerable and open with one another. And I'm so blessed to have great community around me. And but at the same time, this conversation is so important, because it's so easy to feel like I just need to be white. I just need to be more white. Or, oh, how do I be more Asian? And how do I fit into this community that I don't understand? And I'm so grateful for this open space where we can dive into this topic and talk about how it's a really historical problem, and that it's a systemic problem, and that I haven't been crazy to think that, that it's not the person, and then I don't always think that the people are the mean people. It's just that, they're surrounded in a space where they can't grow or learn. And this year has been a really interesting year in me. I don't think I really faced my Asianness until the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm so grateful to the community that lives around and supports me. And I just wanted to say, yesterday we had an interesting discussion as a table with people who maybe didn't face those things or didn't realize, that fetishizing is a problem, or that the way we look is a problem. And that, I shared my story that in the first few weeks of COVID, I went to the grocery store and someone threw their card at me and told me I was the reason that this was all happening. And that was the first time where I really had to identify with these strong things and realizing that people don't see us as people sometimes. And so, thank you so much for creating this space, for willing to share, and for hearing me out. And I appreciate all of you so much. And thank you to ACCT.
Thanks, Abigail, for sharing so vulnerably. And yeah, your emotions are your superpowers. Like, don't. I feel like the more we're disconnected to them, the more we forget, right? They're telling you something about something that's true, and that's hard to face, for sure. I did want to share just one piece around intersectionality and white supremacy, because it's white supremacy that makes us think about either or mentality, that you either have to be Canadian or either Chinese, or it's also white supremacy that expects us to be perfect, that there's a certain way of being Canadian, there's a certain way of being, and like, if anything, if you can leave today with giving yourself permission to just be yourselves, right? To just allow and to remember that you're enough as you are right now. And there's no perfect way. There's no one way, right? Discard that either or mentality, discard that perfectionism, and to learn more about white supremacy, because I think there's a lot that's liberating about learning and unpacking that. Welcome.
Hi, hello, hi. My name is Alvin. You can call my Chinese name Xiao Chen. Thank you for sharing those very personal stories. I guess having a space like this where people feel comfortable and willing to share those stories is great. I just want to kind of bring in some more positive lights to the issue that we're discussing. I guess I came to Canada when I was 14, so I was, half grown up, living in China and then coming here. So I've a bit of a different perspective to the sort of dual identity that people have. I kind of see it as a more of an advantage instead of a disadvantage, because I mean, even with any unfortunate events or hardship, it always comes with opportunities, right? So those people that persevere through hardship tend to rise above and achieve great things. But when it comes to culture, I think, living in two different cultures, growing up in one and then having to be able to adapt into another one, there's an advantage in that where you can. If you fully understand both culture, you can take what's good about both culture, because no matter how old a culture is or whatnot, there's always downsides. Like someone in the chat mentioned about patriarchy. I mean, that was one of the problems from the old Chinese culture, where that sort of limits progress, as that person mentioned, which is exactly true. And if you go to China now, you realize, okay, that has been long gone. And actually, women has way more equal opportunities in China compared to in Canada or the U.S., which is not that's the case. So, from my own experience coming to Canada, I guess me being a very competitive person, I always want to compare my culture to the Western culture. I was always curious. Okay, why has China been lagged off in terms of economically? Because knowing the history, Chinese history, China was once a great power, right? So we have 5,000 years of history. The culture, not even though we lagged behind in terms of technology development, but in terms of culture, there's great intelligence that's behind that culture. So really, I guess growing up in China, you learn some about that. And I actually personally learned a lot of that even after coming to Canada, because I think that sort of grounds me of at least having that confidence of embracing a new culture, right? So as I was sort of trying to fit into the Canadian culture, I'm always looking at, okay, so they do things differently here. Is this new way of doing things better than what we used to do? In the Chinese culture, for example, the family culture that we have, most Asian family cultures we have very strong family culture, which I think is a good thing, right? We shouldn't throw that away and just move out of your family and be on your own after you're 18, right? We still keeping a lot more touch and a lot more closer to our siblings, our families, our parents. When our parents get old, we spend a lot more time with our parents, whereas the Western culture is less of that, right? So that's something that I think is better in terms of Chinese culture. So I keep that part, but where the Western culture, they emphasize being self-dependent, and I think that's a good thing as well. So, but those can coexist. You can be a very self-dependent person, but also have a stronger family tie. So, if you look at things in a more positive light, so yes, there's got to be hardship in terms of trying to fit in, but you don't want to fit in and lose what you have, right? You don't want to just assimilate. You want to try to fit in, but also have your own characteristics, right? So I think that gives us an advantage as well. I mean, even when you gather around having a group session, you have even though the experience. Sorry, what was, I forgot the last speaker's name, but her experience, it might be. It might be a hard experience, but that's a unique story that only she has, right? And by going through that, she must have learned a lot and gained a lot from that experience. So I think if we look at a lot of these, I guess, problems that we can call it in a more positive light and try to extract as much positivity from it, we can actually turn this as an advantage for our Asian community, and especially the ones that grew up here, understand the Western culture, but can also get in touch with the Asian culture. So we can actually act as a bridge between the two very different culture, right? And that's actually a lot more needed nowadays with the rising conflict between U.S. and China, but it's more of a West against East kind of competition. I mean, that is getting more into a political space, but there needs to be more dialogue, because there seems to be even though, having the internet, everyone should be more connected, but there seems to be a growing more and more disconnect between, the West and the East, where it's growing hostility. So people like us that, have a foot in both cultures should act as more of a bridge, because we understand both cultures, we understand the pros and cons of either culture. So we have better tools to navigate through that. So use that as an advantage instead of, seeing it as something that we have to just overcome but gain nothing from it, right? Anytime you go through hardship, there's lessons to be learned, and there's opportunities to be had, right?
So many great points, Alvin. Like, so many great points about perspective and being able to pull the best out of all of the cultures that we bridge. And I feel like this conversation again could go on and on, because you're bringing up so many important points. I want to hear from a couple more people. So
yeah,
I bet you a bunch of people are going to find you at the tables after this session is done. We have time for one more speaker here today, but again, we will have opportunities later on in the day to hear more stories, and of course, there's always a networking time to share. Hello, welcome.
Oh, hi. My name is Jing. Hi, Tesicca. Hi, Adrienne. Thank you, everyone, for sharing all the very different perspectives. In particular, I think my viewpoint resonates a lot with Xiaochen, because we have a very similar background. I work as a marketing consultant, and part of my job is to analyze the Chinese audiences in North America for my clients, and to really identify the diversity within us, like really to identify the diversity within Chinese Canadian groups. Like we call even like Asian is even a more broader term, but within Chinese Canadians, there is actually a lot of diversity. And my job was to identify their media consumption habits and to help the client, like to help the business target Chinese Canadians better, because some of us would consume WeChat, some of us would consume YouTube. I've been doing this, but I never really thought about, like, our stories are so diverse. I got so good at, okay, I will help you target and they can buy this and buy that. But in fact, I've really recently started to realize there's, like, within our stories, there's also a lot of diversity. So just myself, I actually moved to Canada in 2001 as a young adult. I was 20 at the time, so I came here to attend university. I think I personally I've never experienced a lot of the trauma as many of the people that share the stories here, because I was never the only Chinese person in the classroom. I felt like there has always been a very kind of close-knit community for international students coming from mainland China and Hong Kong, Macau, and all of these regions. They're like, for myself, in the many years, like, if you call it lonely, leaving your families, but it was never a traumatic experience as I can remember. So again, like, resonating with Xiaochen, I actually bring a very kind of positive perspective to this. And I think a lot of people, like, with the huge surge in the number of new immigrants from mainland China and from a number of international students in the past 10 years, a lot of people have the same kind of story as me. And I want to say is, like, I think these stories, the positive stories, also deserve a place within the larger Chinese Canadian community. I think personally for myself, that I never felt that I needed to fit in. I just felt really comfortable in a place in between. There is, like, positivity of internationalism. I think there's opportunities, like Xiaochen was mentioning, there's, like, we can create better bilateral relationship and encourage more collaboration in tech and commerce, in trades, in cultures. Like, I see that as my responsibility, and I take pride in that. And then it just, I think that is exactly the benefit of being able to be within the two cultures and kind of really moving freely in between the two cultures. So I just want to kind of bring that positive element. But I do have a struggle. I think a lot of people share that struggle. A lot of people that I know that have similar experiences as myself have that struggle. Like, I work in a very kind of white dominant industry in marketing and advertising. I feel like I've been recognized, but I still, for my skills, not because of my ethnicity or anything, but I still have that struggle. Is I never feel fully settled. I feel like I'm always, like, choosing, do I have an opportunity to move back to China? I would take it. And that's a real struggle too. Like, there's a lot of, because I do, like, my parents, my in-laws are all living in Asia, and I have that burden to take care of them, and I have a lot of, like, very, very strong ties with many aspects of China. So that's the struggle that I think a lot of us facing, taking care of the older families, and also wanting to give kids more exposure too. Like, for our kids, we want them to fit in here, but we also want to give them more exposure to our cultures, and exposing them to the opportunities in China, learning the language, learning about the culture too. But overall, I just wanted to kind of I resonate with everyone here that share the stories. I recognize the history of the struggle of Chinese Canadians, many generations. I think there's a lot of hope. There is a lot of positivity in this.
Thank you so much. I love leaving off this session this segment just with that hope and positivity, because I think that that's what we all want, right? We all want to be being fully ourselves. We want to acknowledge the struggles and the work and the resistance that our ancestors have done. We want to acknowledge the mistakes that they've made, because everybody has made mistakes. We want to hold that all in the complexity of what it is to be human, and then to be able to step forward into the future as complex beings, and seeing each other as in our own complexity. That's the end of my thought, Tesicca. But we do have to wrap up. What final words from you at this session here?
Just a lot of gratitude for all the folks who shared so generously, and hoping that in the second part of this, after the panel comes back, we'll also have a bit of chance to open up for more of a town hall from everyone, right? Not just young voices, but I think really part of this was to try to shift some of the power balance as well, right? Because often, especially in Chinese culture and also in Canadian culture, it's always the older folks, you know, who are the teachers, the parents, the coaches, and speak first and have more power, right? And so in this session, we wanted to flip that on its head, create space for everyone to share, but to start with the young voices, because often we're the last to speak if we get to speak at all. So thank you so much for all the young voices and folks who've shared, and love to welcome back the panel for their reflections, and also to set us onto this next part of the conversation, right, where we can talk about hoping and dreaming collectively, and creating what is this world that we want to create together for ourselves and for future generations.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tesicca, and thank you, Adrienne. What a great session there. I mean, listening to all the various young people and their thoughts and what they struggle through and the challenges that they have gone through. It's just like we don't think about that. Sometimes we only think about ourselves and what we are struggling. But when you start listening to other people, then you realize there's so much more to just being Chinese, you know. So I appreciate everyone, and thank you to all for bringing, you know. I'm going to, you know, Tesicca, I think that, can we bring Tesicca back on? Because I really think that we want Tesicca here as well in this discussion. She's the brainstorm behind those poems, which are so powerful. And it really touches all of us in different ways. I know that when I read the poems, Tesicca, and then when you actually did it and said it out loud, it makes it even more relevant and resonate more to what we feel. And so thank you for that, because I think that it truly shows what your feelings are, what you are really trying to get out to the open, to everyone. So appreciate that, and thank you for that. What really resonates with me when I was reading is your, I think it was your third poem, where you said to call too Canadian or to be deemed not Canadian enough. And that resonates so much with me, because, you know, growing up, because I came over as very young, you know, so I try to fit into the community. So I try to see if I can be not as Chinese as I can. I try not to speak the Chinese language wherever, you know, I always stuck to my English and stuff like that, you know, because we wanted to fit in, right? And then as I grew older, then I realized, especially once I got into my current job, I realized that those cultural things that were ingrained into us actually helped me to appreciate who we really are, and what we can give to the community, and what we can give back to the society that we sometimes don't think. And we at one point we thought it was too negative, and yet we now think that, oh, it is actually, you know. And I guess my question to you to start is, and I said that earlier, is that, is it being Canadian? Does it mean that we need to lose our identity, or how do we combine? How do we balance that identity to make us more Canadian?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think already so many of the voices I've shared so far, especially at the end, Xiaozhen and Jingjing, talking about that silver lining, that, it's not just we can exist as both, and it's actually, in a sense, a superpower, right? It's such a gift to have a perception into multiple worlds, and understanding different culture. It gives us such an appreciation and empathy for worlds beyond our own as well. And I think for me, the way that I always talk about it is that, in Canada, there's a social safety net. There's EI and welfare, and like if you are going through a hard time, there's the government systems to catch you. But I feel like I have that, and also, I know that I would never be homeless, right? Because I would have so many cousins and uncles and like families to pass through, and so I have this double sense of security and safety and comfort that I have both the Western system and the Eastern system, right? That's just one example of the many ways that I think, we can also look at, what are the strengths, I think, to what Xiaozhen talked about individuality, about independence, right? Being unafraid to speak out and to be bold and to push the boundaries of what status quo is, while also keeping in mind, collectivism, right? How are we doing this for all of us, right? You're not doing it for yourself to put your name out there, but you're doing this because you want the world to be at a better place for your family, for your community, and for all of us, right? So I think it's like, what are the values? What are the pieces that we can harvest? Because there's so much wisdom, and from both and from all the cultures that we're a part of and that we touch, as little as much as we know of it, right? And the other piece is just that there's always an opportunity to deepen, right? It's not too late if you really want to learn more Cantonese or Mandarin or Taiwanese or Shanghai, whichever language or dialect you're part of. And it's not too late as well to learn French or to explore cooking and color, the pieces of your culture that you don't know, right? So I think I'll pause.
And I agree with you. The funny thing I did find was that when I did start it out in my in my role, and because my Chinese wasn't so proficient, and because I really didn't speak it that much, I was actually being frowned on, I think, by my own Chinese community, because they didn't think I was Chinese enough. That's what it was. They didn't think that because she can't speak Cantonese fluently, so therefore she's not really our
one of us. Yeah.
So that's sort of thing that I experienced. Albert, I know that you have that. I think you probably share similar sentiment as what I just said.
Thank you. And I just want to reflect back as well, because it's about hope. And Tesicca, you pivoted earlier just by saying that this second part must be about hope. Must be about dreaming. This is a leaders conference. We're here to try and help everyone become a leader. And that's a space in itself. And that's not normally a space that's open to us. And yes, we can talk a lot about trying to become a leader, and we go to school and learn how to be a leader. But and if you don't mind, Sandra, I just want to start this way.
Yeah.
Just because you're the hardest working person in a team does not make you a leader. Or if you're the smartest person or the fastest person, still not a leader. And I know I just took away the three top examples of your parents have given you on how to succeed in this world. I know that. I think empathy has a lot to do with leadership. And somehow in our community, we must learn how to teach each other to be empathetic, to learn that. But even that by itself is not sufficient, because you can have the best team and you have the best loving team around you, but if no courage to move on, nothing happens. But we think of, and this came up yesterday, we think of leadership, courage from the Hollywood style, the big tough man. And I find that because I spent time in the military, that those who use toughness as courage, you actually have to drive your adrenaline up. You have to use drugs or another way to whip up your adrenaline. And when that is over and when the adrenaline runs, you're no better than a spent party balloon. And then you have to drive it back up again. And you find that you need to use more and more adrenaline. I want to talk about moral courage, that we lead by moral courage. And the examples of that, Malala Yousafzai, Greta Thunberg, Autumn Pelche, who at the age of 13 spoke at the United Nations about water conservation for indigenous peoples. That's moral courage. And I find that you do not run out of steam when you lead morally. And the beauty that I find with moral courage as well is that, sorry, just I forgot to turn off my phone. Moral courage as well is that, unlike physical courage, there's only one leader in a team. Whereas with moral courage, everyone in a team could have that. And so what I've done now is, because of this and reflecting on what Tesicca, you wrote, I've come to realize that maybe what we need to do, and this is the hope, is that we need to have a community support, and we talked about that yesterday, develop a community support that can help us, all of us, develop moral courage. So that's how I want, and yes, Sandra, I had the same experience as you.
No, and you know what, Albert, you're so right. And that empathy part is something that we all need to learn to be able to do. And sometimes we just don't give enough of that, or we don't show it enough. That's the thing. Vivian, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on what we have just discussed? The empathy part, to be inclusive, how do you find it from your angle?
Yeah, and I think when we had the open conversations with the attendees, like, Bo reminded me of something super important about mentioning about intersectionality, because often we need to look at the issue of how, like, our Chinese Canadians are being treated and being, like, included in certain spaces, and how the magnitude of challenges are very different depending on our background. For me, being a woman and also being Chinese, wanting to navigate leadership positions, like, I can just say it was extremely difficult. And having conversations with, like, some of my colleagues who are also of Chinese descent, but maybe they're male or maybe they're of, like, different identities, the magnitude of challenges are, like, so significantly different. And I think it's so important that we have this space and have conversations that are tailored for specific groups to be able to feel supported and thrive in whatever they're hoping to achieve. And honestly, it's been such a humbling experience to hear from everybody, especially sharing your vulnerability. And I echo what Tesicca said about the vulnerability is the superpower. And I see it as, like, the glue for us to move forward as, like, a cohort or a community to achieve whatever we plan to achieve. It's just so inspiring, and I'm lost for words. I'm so sorry. But yeah, it's just been great. It's just been so great.
Yeah, this discussion has been so because it's so personal too. This discussion, that sometimes it is hard for us, and especially I think we, as I earlier said, we've been ingrained not to speak up, not to say things, not to express ourselves. So it's really tough for us to try to express. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone that has contributed, because you have made a difference by speaking up and letting us know. And thank you for your courage to speak up, because it's not easy to speak up. Thank you, Vivian. Evan, I just want to come to you. You are also a very successful entrepreneur. How do you view it from your corporate world?
I still want to acknowledge that I'm amazed by the diversity and the richness of the stories that are being shared, by the way. And I'm always struck by how diverse our community is. And I was writing some notes to myself about all the dimensions that were introduced here, like our ages, our origin story, not to tap into the superhero thing, but all the different, everyone had a different origin story. Everyone had a different origin story, literally, right? Not one, two are alike. And then the other dimensions of sexuality, right? If you're, young immigrant child coming here, born here, I was struck by the last two very positive stories from, I think it was Alvin and Jingjing, about being mainland Chinese. And the one thing I've struck in working in corporate, by the way, and I see generations of different immigrants coming through, and I've always been very much trying to act by giving them a leg in, because I've always realized, you know, when you're Chinese Canadian, you realize how many people in our community have not been able to use the skills they bring because of institutional barriers, right? I'm an engineer and went to this university, and of course I can't get in, or a lawyer or whatever, right? Because I can't sit the bar, or I can't meet these standards, right? Now I'm, you know, washing dishes in a restaurant, and the waste of the human you know, capital there, and the human strength. But one thing that did strike me was the difference in the generations, and the mainland Chinese individuals that have come, especially the last 10 years, have seen a different China. I think we haven't talked about that, because that's something that when I grew up here as Chinese Canadian, China was not an admired country, or a feared country for that matter. I would like to have China been feared at least, right? You know, but no, there's no respect for the country, right? China was seen as a backward, impoverished communist nation, whatever communism meant, and was a boogeyman or something. And we were implicitly part of that somehow, magically, right? And no one cared about our nuances. No one cared if you're from Taiwan or you're KMT. What was KMT? You know, Kuomintang. You know, you didn't matter to them, right? We're just one thing. So the one thing that was a positive I took away, though, was they grew up they weren't being gaslit. Like I grew up being gaslit about my inferiority, right? And luckily for me, something inside of me, you know, was beating that, going, no, I'm not going to take this. I know that's wrong, right? My parents instilled some pride in being Chinese and left me enough cultural artifacts that I could hang on to those things, right? So I take that forward, and maybe to answer your questions, Sandra, about corporate, I had spoken about this. There is systemic racism, and there is also literally social racism as part of that. Again, I think I talked about the exclusion because of social circles that you walk in and live in, right? So simple little things like, you know, the clubs you belong to, right? So we know sort of those institutional things, like these places that people eat and drink at, and you're not part of that, right? And you feel your otherness. I definitely had that awkwardness of walking in, realizing, hey, I'm the only non-white person here except the service, right? Everyone is white, right? And that awkwardness. And you know, I know how, I mean, I feel for your, Albert, and your story about the toxic masculine culture that exists in Canada through the power institutions is truly there. I mean, like it's always hilarious when people say it's not there, right? And we're past that. And but the minute the doors are closed, the weird part, by the way, I kind of blend in. So then those corporate circles, they forget that I'm Asian. So one of these racist jokes comes out or whatever, and they go, oh, right, but not you, Evan, right? It's that a Paki, a Chink, and a Jew walk into a room, and then, you know, that kind of a joke comes out. It's cringeworthy, and I'm sitting there listening to that. And for years, I kind of, you know, I was complicit. I had to sort of take it because I had to move my own agenda forward, and I became the subversive. And I think many of us that are Chinese Canadians are subversive in those corporate roles. We keep our heads down. We do work, and we work hard at things. I don't want to stick out, but I'm also not playing along really, right? When I'm quietly trying to do things and move things on when no one notices, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm weaving and dodging, doing things in the background, and I got to be very good at that. And my radar's always up, and I'm trying to read the room and figure out, you know, who is truly, you know, got their own racist agenda that is there, right? Or elitist agenda. Can I also pull those together? Because our elites, I'll talk about that whole social stratification, there is a old money elite in this country. There's no doubt about it, right? And they have their own ideas, and they support their own political causes, right? So, you know, I have to play in that. And I think, you know, lots of, you know, the sort of the young leaders I've worked with ask me these questions, and they're loaded questions. And I go, I can't tell you what to do because it's your journey. I can give you my story. Maybe I give you some tactics that you can think about. And all I can do is share that, be aware that, you know, change comes, in my opinion, change comes in, you know, sort of one small action at a time. I just don't see a revolution happening. Right.
I totally agree with you, Evan. I think it is those many small steps before we can actually make changes, you know, and to change the mindset of the people that we are surrounded by. You know, I know that even when I got into the political world, you know, it was people viewed me, well, first of all, I was the only Chinese that was elected in a city really was dominated by the Italians and the Jewish community. So there was really no Chinese at all at the time when I got elected. And just to have to struggle to get myself be heard was something. I was taken as sort of like a if you want to call it a joke. Oh, she's just there, but really not there. And because of who I was married to, and because he's Italian, so some people would actually listen to me, but really don't listen to me. I remember, and I think I shared this with Albert, where, at the beginning, even if there were very serious decision to be made, instead of them coming to me to ask me what my opinion and what I believe in, they actually went to my husband. They went to my husband and says, oh, can you convince her to vote for us? Or can you convince her to support? I'm going like, so I finally, and I think when I finally got confident enough, I built that confidence and I came up and I basically said to them, I go, hold on. If you want my opinion, then ask me directly. Don't go around about it. Don't go to my husband, because as much as we may share the same ideology, does not mean that I will be always on the same wavelength or believe in the same thing. So I constantly have, and I made that, I had to actually stood out and said that to people before they actually respect you for who you are. And I think that's a struggle that we have. And I think it also is because we are female.
Yeah.
Tesicca, I'm sure you agree with me. Being female and being Asian makes it even doubly hard for us to try to make our point across the board. Do you not agree with that, Tesicca?
Yeah. I think they see us for who we are on the outside first, right? And I think to your point, Evan, around the change, it's not a revolution. It's all the small things. I think that the change actually starts with us first, right? It has to start internally with each and every one of us listening today on this together, right? How do we unlearn that internalized patriarchy, right? Who we listen to, who we respect more, who we let speak first, who we create space for, right? How do we unlearn the anti-indigenousness within Chinese culture, right? The anti-Blackness within cultures, right? The Islamophobia, right? All of these things are rooted together, right? And so as we're fighting for our own liberation, right? So that Chinese Canadians, that we can all be ourselves, right? How do we also make sure that we're not doing it so by stepping on others and pushing others down, right? How can we be that rising tide that lifts all boats and helps actually liberate other people? Because we're modeling, that vulnerability, that fearlessness of being ourselves, right? As Sandra said, come talk to me. You're setting a new bar, not just for yourself, but for other Chinese Canadians, other councillors that are going to come up as well, right? And so it's hard because you're breaking that bamboo ceiling, or they also talk about a glass cliff for women as well, right? Where we're not set up to succeed in the same way, right? So how do we not just fight so that it's easier for ourselves, so that we have the self-respect that we deserve and that people treat us with that respect that we deserve, that you talked about, Sandra, but that they also start to treat that for others as well, right? For the other people that they dehumanize, that they don't treat with the dignity, right? How is it that it's connected to the 215 Indigenous children, right, that we found in Kamloops Residential School? That's connected to the anti-Asian racism. It's the fear of the other, anyone who's not white, anyone who's not Europeanized, right? Like that they treat it as lesser, right? The Chinese head tax, the internment of Japanese, the Islamophobia, what happened recently, right, in London, Ontario. It's not our history, it's our present, right? We're still living with it. And it's because, yes, it's the systems that are racist and sexist and patriarchal and ageist and and queerphobic and homophobic, right? But it's also us. We are the systems. We uphold those systems, right? And so to look internally, how do we question what we've held to be true, and whether it harms our thoughts and beliefs and our fundamental paradigms might be harming others, right? Because of that limitation of imagination, right? Because we believe the stories that have been told to us about who Chinese Canadians can be, who Black people can be, who Indigenous people can be, what knowledge and strength that can young people have, right? That they're future leaders, not current leaders, right? I think just questioning those fundamental assumptions, deconstructing them, it has to start with us internally. And that's the invitation today, right? As we leave, to think about how we actually internalize that harm. And how do we then perpetuate it? And how can we stop that cycle of harm with ourselves so we don't pass it on to our kids? We don't pass it on to the people that we surround ourselves with, right? It ends with us. How do we make that active choice that this stops now in as many ways as I can be aware of, and that, future generations and the kids coming up next, they'll see more of the limitations that I can't see yet, right? And they'll teach us, and that we have so much to learn across generations, from each other, from our elders, and from our youth.
Totally agree with you, Tesicca. I think that it all starts from us. It's our attitude, it's our way of thinking, it's our way of acting. That's what it is, and that's how we can change the thing. We are coming down to the last a little bit, so I want to just give everybody a chance. And my question to all of you is that in the current political stage that we are in right now, can you give me what you think is the top 2 things that you think we have to do in order to help our youth to succeed in the future? So I'm going to start off with, let me go to Albert first. Albert, you tell me.
I was going to suggest, why don't you go to Vivian first, because I think her voice is going to be most important.
Vivian, let's hear from you first, Vivian.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, but 2 of the things that I've been thinking, especially with a lot of recent Government of Canada priorities of bringing in more newcomers, it's going to be inevitable that our population will become more diverse. And there's also been so many conversations about the need to diversify public service. And I think one thing that I haven't been hearing a lot is, so what is the government internally working on in terms of deconstructing and dismantling that systemic racism that still exists within institution? It's so deeply rooted, and just the thought of bringing more people with diverse backgrounds to diversify the sector, I 100% am in support of that, but it also has to happen simultaneously with dismantling what already exists within the system. I don't exactly know what would be the key steps to move forward with that. But I think one thing is definitely needed is education. Education is definitely always going to be the key to bring awareness and to educate people about the harms done in the past and how it led to the present and what we plan for the future. Those are very important. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts of what to move forward, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you, especially the education part. I think we really need to put a lot more emphasis, a lot more efforts into that. And government needs to put more fundings into that area in order for us to all actually understand, learn about our history, learn about where we are, and learn how we can move forward as we continue. Evan, how do you feel about that? What are your 2 main things that you think would help us?
I think it's our time now, right? I mean, COVID, the anti-Asian incidence is galvanizing our community. We got to take, it's that classic never let a crisis go to waste, right? So we have people's attentions. We have our own community attention. So I would say that, we would echo what Vivian said about educating our own community. I mean, we are a group of people that are paying attention to this and care deeply about it, but we're probably a small minority, right? And we need to take the word out there and involve others. And by the way, I think that I know a lot of young Asians that are out there that are struggling, right? Whether it's with their sexuality or their place in society, their self-hatred, it's there. I mean, yes, I hang out in dark places like Reddit and sometimes 4chan and some horrible places. So, and so I'm aware of this undercurrent with the youth, right? And I work with a lot of very young, people in my own development culture and technology culture and stuff like that. So I'm aware of these things, and it's quite toxic. And I think for this group here is that, the storytelling has been very powerful in telling those stories to others that they're not alone, there are groups like this. This group needs to continue to get the word out in our own community. You know, that's one half, and the second half, I'll be brief too, is that we do have to, you know, stand up, right? We cannot take the aggressions anymore, right? And I've been trying to as much as I can. I'm actually waiting for one. I really want to take a fight out, kind of out there. I'm looking for someone to step across the line right now. So, you know, so I think we need to take action. I'll go back to, you know, if we all take some small actions here, you know, we're going to keep moving the agenda forward and making the world just a little bit better every day. So those are my thoughts.
Super. Thank you, Evan, and so agreeable on that, on what you said, Albert.
Thank you. So much. And the two things that I would do, actually, I'm going to narrow it down to one. Okay. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that it's no longer good enough to just have a seat at the table. You have to change the table. Yeah. Many of us here in this room have managed to get ourselves a seat at the table. We need to change it. And here's how I'm going to change it. How many times, Evan, have you made a suggestion and you know it's dismissed because you were Chinese? You came from a different angle. Same with you, Sandra. Same with you, Tesicca. Same with you, Vivian. My job now, in my old age, I'm the oldest one in this panel, so I can say that, is I'm going to now say from now on, whenever you guys have an idea, is to say, hang on, did you just hear what Sandra just said?
Yes.
Hang on, did you hear the idea that Vivian has? Hang on, did we just hear? Let me repeat what Evan just said.
Yes.
We should champion ourselves.
Yes.
Those who have seats in the table, let's start championing. If you're looking for a member for board, boy, do I have a recommendation for you. Her name is Tesicca. You should hear her speak. Let me introduce you. Let me buy you dim sum, and you two can speak. Right?
I like the dim
that's
sum.
what we have. And to me, that's the small act. That's the act of changing the table.
So
and then Tesicca, when you get that seat, change the table again.
Why do we even need the table? Let's throw out the table.
But you see, that's so from now on, that's what I'm going to be doing. Have you heard about so and so? Did you hear the poem that Tesicca wrote? Did you hear what Sandra did and Vaughn? You know, let's start talking about each other. And I think that's why gathering together in this network is so important. You know, I've learned so much from everybody, and I think that's the important part.
Thank you, Albert. You're so right, so right. Championing those people that we know and moving them forward. Our job is to mentor and move them forward, and that's what we should do. I'm coming back to you, Tesicca, for your last thoughts on what we were talking about.
No, I just want to say ditto to what everyone else on the panel has said. It's been so powerful. I think I wanted to start off with anti-Asian, anti-racism, anti-oppression education, because I think it's not enough. Like, skin folk doesn't mean kinfolk, right? Like, just because you are racialized doesn't mean you have a racial equity lens, right? And white folks can be our allies as well, right? And that investment in education that Vivian talked about, absolutely, right? We need that. We need that so much. And then I think Evan and Albert talked about is like, how do we be champions for ourselves? How do we change the table, throw at the table? Maybe we don't need a table at all, but it's not enough to have one or two, 3 at least voices, so that there isn't that tokenism, right? That there isn't that burden that, Vivian, you're going to represent all younger Chinese Canadians, right? Like, it's just impossible, right? It's not possible. And we're setting ourselves up for failure if we don't expect more, right? From each other and also from the institutions, right? So to ask more, to demand for more, and to not stay silent. I think it's so, so important. And then I think invest in ourselves, right? To do that education and that unlearning work, because we each ripple out into the world, our actions, our beliefs, the way that we show up, the way that we hold each other, the way that we judge each other, the way that we speak about each other. I think it starts with us. And you're absolutely right, Evan. It's not just one. It's not going to transform overnight, but this is where the revolution begins, right? It's a revolution in our hearts, in our minds, in our souls, and with each other together. And the last thing that I want to share off is just that this space has been so transformational, so magical, because It's a space where we can be honest with each other, right? We can be real. And this is actually a tool. It's called caucusing, right? Finding folks, whether you're the only queer folks in your organization, you're the only younger folks in your organization, you're the only Asians in your organizations, and having spaces to talk about the stories, talk about the harm, so that you're not holding on to it. You can let the poison out a little, right? And then you can heal, and then you can organize, and then you can strategize, right? So to whether those spaces exist already or don't exist, you can also create them, right, for yourselves. Create these spaces of healing, of honesty, of truth, of power, of reckoning. This is where the revolution begins.
Thank you. No, thank you, Tesicca, and thank you to all my colleagues, my panelist colleagues. I think it's been great, and thank you to Adrienne as well. I think it's been fantastic this morning. I think it's well spent morning. This is a first time that I've really been involved where we're able to get true, sincere, honest comments from our young people, and which is great. So I want to thank the people that actually came on as well, because I think it really is this is just the beginning of a very long process. But as Evan says, it takes small steps in order to create what we want to create. So thank you to every one of you for doing this. I know we need to go on a break. We are gonna go take a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna coming back, and we're gonna have William, that we're gonna do some town hall where you get to even have more conversation and more discussion. So thank you to everyone. Have a 10-minute break and be back. Well, now it's at, it's really actually 11 over there. I'm trying to figure out how to change the timing because it's 1:49 here, So in 10 minutes time, so we will be back at, I guess, I don't know, whatever time, 10 minutes. I'm not very good with that. Anyway, thank you all, and we will see you back in 10 minutes.
Starting. Welcome back, everybody. Ready to start the revolution? So I know there's been a lot going on in the group chat. Thanks, Albert. But I know not everyone's participating in the group chat. So I actually want to start off with a quick poll. If you look in your top right corner, there's the chat's Q&A polls. Can we click over there real quick? Just want to do a quick check-in and see how everybody's feeling. So if we can have the poll there. Thanks, Donna. Yeah, so for everyone here, can you relate to what's been shared so far? There's quite a diverse range, so. Okay. And so far, 48 votes. Get your votes in if you, okay. So I'm seeing here that I think there's generally strong resonance with what's being shared so far, somewhat, and for those of you that are saying no or somewhat, I'd love a chance to hear your stories as well. And next question here, what best describes what you're feeling right now? It might be multiple of the above as well, sorry, not giving you that option. But how are you feeling? Okay. Yeah, understand that a few folks might be a little bit drained, and that's understandable. And if you need someone to talk to about that, I know Howard and Patty are available here for support. But very strong understanding, and a good proportion of excitement and motivation as well. Thanks, everybody. So I'm just going to bring us back to the chat here. And with so much going on, we've heard a lot of great stories and a lot of emotion. And we really want to take the next half hour to shepherd these experiences and emotions and put them to work. Right? And where do we go from here? And we're going to start dreaming together. And we want to bounce some ideas off one another and see where this takes us. So there's kind of two ways to contribute here. Write in the chat box, submit your ideas there. Anything that comes to mind. We don't need to have a flowing conversation. Just take your notes in this chat box and fire off your ideas. We're also going to be welcoming all of you up to the stage if you want to share and dig deeper into an idea that you have, something that you're really excited about, something you really want to see. And you can do so by clicking the hand icon right below me. So because of this, a few key boundaries we want to put up around this. We want to limit the storytelling here. And we want to focus on, things you want to see, ideas you want to, lead yourself, or you want to see other people take on. And we also want to set up somewhat of a time limit because we only have half an hour. So we want to kind of fire these off pretty quick. So Vivian started off pretty high level with us. Tesicca echoed that as well about education. Albert took us to the other end of the spectrum about championing ourselves and actions we can take daily. But let's get started. If there's any hands that are raised, I see a few already. Let's get going into what we want to see moving forward. Starting with you, Brittany.
Hi, William. So I was thinking, because of yesterday, we also had a brief discussion about mentorship and the importance of making sure that we don't lose the knowledge that older people have to pass on to the younger generations. And so I think in order to have that connection, it'll be really important to have a mentorship program, not only to ensure that we go forward and we don't have to experience the same sorts of issues, but as we can clearly tell, there were a lot of emotions and it was a very like emotional and sort of therapeutic experience for people to be able to hear their stories be heard and be and have that relationship and have that relation with other people. And so just also having that knowledge to tackle the workplace, mental, family, just knowing that we have someone there that's older and detached from our families that we can rely on, but also the other way around, because mentors will learn a lot from their mentees as well. I think it would be a very good idea. And maybe something else to touch up on the education point would be to have workshops. So I hear a lot of people in the comments saying, especially parents, are saying, oh, we have to make sure we raise our kids to be self-sufficient, independent, confident in their identities. And so perhaps we also have to have workshops for parents and children to sort of go into depth on, okay, what does it mean exactly to be Canadian Chinese or Chinese Canadian, whichever way you want to say it.
Thank you very much for that, Brittany. Starting us off with mentorship. That's one of the first things that came to mind as well. Actually, can we pull up, if Albert's still here, can we pull up Albert real quick just to make a few comments on mentorship? I know Albert does a lot of mentoring. And I'm wondering if you want to share a quick perspective here, Albert, before we move on.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brittany. And that's such a valuable point that you brought up about mentorship. And it's very big. And it seems to be a catchphrase nowadays. Every corporation has mentorship. Every MBA school will talk to you about mentorship and all that. I do a lot of mentoring. And let me tell you, the first thing I want to make sure is that I do not live vicariously off the life of my mentees. And that in the mentorship relationship, the mentee is the most important, not the mentor. I appreciate that you said that a mentor will learn, and yes, I have learned. And perhaps here's what I think we should look at. We're all trying to climb up this pole that we're getting at. Those of us who've got to a certain level of the pole, if you just follow me and follow what I've done, you're just tucked in right behind me on that pole. You're not going to get any higher. And what we have to realize is that there's somebody up there has greased the top part of the pole so you start to slip off. So perhaps here's one way of thinking what mentoring is. As a mentor, I want to share with you my contacts. I want to share with you my access, the network that I have. So stand on my shoulders. Stand on my shoulders to get beyond that greasy part of the pole so you get to that part, to a higher level of pole than I would ever have got to. Maybe that's what mentoring is. Not to follow me, but to go beyond me. So thank you. That to me is, I think, what mentoring should be. And we can easily do that in this community, in this Chinese-Canadian community, or Canadian-Chinese community. But thank you really for letting me say that.
Thank you, Albert. You just made that sound a lot more exciting. And thank you, Brittany, for sharing too. Next up, I think we have Megan here. Come on up, Megan.
Oh, I realized I had my video off. Hi, William. Okay, so first off, thank you, ACCT, for creating a space for all these conversations. Oh, is it working now? Okay. Yeah, thank you, ACCT, for creating a space for all these conversations, and for everyone this morning who is sharing such personal and impactful stories. I think one thing that can help build a sense of belonging and community in the next generation is creating programming and opportunities to get people involved. One thing I've found with my friend groups and a lot of people I know is that a lot of them aren't involved because they want to spend time on personal development, or they're spending time on school and work. And I think for them that there just isn't that drive to get involved. But I think if there's programs in place, whether it's volunteer opportunities for tutoring or to get involved in senior homes, just to have those intergenerational connections, maybe we can create a stronger sense of community and sense of belonging in order to hold more conversations like this.
I really appreciate that, the sense of kind of structure around our programs and how we create more opportunities. Actually, what I like most about what you said here is it's pulling us a little bit into kind of the community structure piece. It's not just the leaders we have now that are young Chinese Canadian leaders of the caliber we have here, but what about the younger experiences, and how do we build those up and create that foundation? Mm-hmm. Thanks, Megan. Next up, we have Dr. Lawrence Lowe.
Thanks so much, William. And thank you, first of all, to Albert for inviting me to come to join this session. And in terms of things, I was looking at sort of the title of the session being Leadership Needs and Issues for Younger Chinese Canadians. It seems that we've landed very heavily on the topic of identity. And if we're talking about things that we can do, I'd really, and to some extent, my own story is tied to this. So I know we're not supposed to do this story, but just very quickly. I was born in Southern Ontario. In 2014, I went the other way. My family moved back to Malaysia. And I actually did high school and my first year university in Malaysia before returning to Canada for the rest, as you know, is history. I ended up becoming the head of one of Canada's worst hit health departments in the COVID-19 pandemic 3 days before the pandemic arrived in our community. And just so I think all of us know this intrinsically, that COVID-19 didn't create racism. It just uncovered it. It gave license for people to actually start. And as someone who is in the public eye and who's very involved in the pandemic response, you can certainly imagine some of the insults and the comments that have been hurled my way. But I found that I've actually been able to weather it quite well, because the one piece of advice I would give to younger Canadians, and I wasn't really Chinese Canadians, and I wasn't really sure if I would fit in the younger category in the first part, because I'm right on the cusp of that 40 that people are talking about. But I really want to just highlight is that we all know, and we've heard today, that identity is incredibly personal. It's incredibly private. And I think a lot of the perturbations of identity come from hearing other voices external to who you are. And I want to really go back to, I think, what Tesicca was saying in her inspiration, her poetry around you are enough. And as someone who was twice a fish out of water, growing up in Southern Ontario as one of only a few Chinese Canadians in the 80s, and then being essentially an expat Canadian in Malaysia, where I experienced the whole other end of being a minority, I think it's really important to highlight that your identity is what you capture and what you create for yourself. If you claim your identity as Southern Ontario and the tragically hip and the city of Toronto, that's yours. That's not something anyone else can take away from you. They can't say, oh, you're not from Toronto, or you're not a tragically hip fan. That's something you own. Similarly, if you're someone who, like me, I initially had trouble adapting to Malaysia, and then I eventually fell in love with the country and consider it, in equal parts my home. And ironically, my family, twice settler, both in Malaysia and also in Canada. I really drive home the fact that yes, I will claim nasi lemak, and I will claim, Manglish and la and all these other things, because that is also part of who I am. And no one can sit there and say, you're not Malaysian, you're not Canadian, you don't claim those things. So I really want to highlight, as you pursue leadership, the most fundamental thing is to remember that you are enough, that fundamentally your identity is what your personal and what is private to you. And it's not changed by what others say you are or what others suggest you should be. And if you want to pursue and learn Chinese better, go for it. If you don't. But that has to come from within. That has to be yours. Similarly with anything else you would choose to pursue.
Thanks for those reminders, Dr. Lau. I want to, okay. Darren, go ahead. I'm going to ask my question in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that was just very, very sudden up. So I lost my train of thought. I guess one of the things I was thinking about, it was something of almost a bit of a passing comment I made during the earlier panel by Evan about about his concerns about some of the communities while he's trawling around in Reddit and 4chan and all those sorts of things. And I think it made me think about that. Obviously there's a group of young Chinese Canadians or Canadian Chinese or whatever we're using here in a space like this, and we've talked about identity and the need for mentorship and all these things. But I think we if I can use that, we as represent a very small fraction. I think there's a great need outside of those who are willing to spend a Saturday morning at a online conference about leadership and stuff. And I think there's a thinking about my friends who are Chinese Canadian, there's so many of them are disengaged, and so many of them are disengaged from the idea of leadership and from the idea of their community. And so there's a great need, and we need, they're not going to come to us, we need to go to them. And so yeah, I would just say that.
Thanks, Darren. I think you highlighted a key problem there is I think even in planning this summit, we knew that the audience was so large. How do we bring them in? Because topics of leadership aren't something that we talk about a lot in growing up. So there are barriers in place, and I hope as whether it's in the chat box or our next speakers, we can touch on that. How do we break down these barriers and have these greater conversations to a larger audience as well? Thank you, Darren. Yeah. Betty, do you want to turn your camera on? We'll come up. Okay. I think we're going to give Betty a second to, next up. I want to consider our speakers and all participants to think about the breadth of solutions that we can brainstorm around too. There's individual level action items. I'm hearing, around mentorship and workshops, there's things we could do at a community level and a national level to create a platform to better share stories. And Lynn, what do you have on your mind?
Hi, William. I want to greet you as a relation because we have the same last name. And anyway, and I realized that I'm from Alberta, and I realized that GTA mentality must be leaking in because I forgot to put my province after Oakville, getting into that center of the universe black hole mentality. Anyway, I wanted to say that, oh my goodness, thank you so much to all the organizers and the sponsors and everybody who made this thing possible, because it's just blowing my mind. Like every second that I'm in these rooms is like mind blowing and healing and just everything that I always wanted as the only one. So I grew up as the only one in Sherwood Park, Alberta, and I'm so grateful to see all of you Edmontonians here, because I may have been sitting in Saturday morning Chinese class with you people and feeling not enough amongst all of you, because I remember being the like giant 14-year-old gangly kid in the like grade 1 class, and all those kids and their amazing language skills, and me in that place. I'm not telling stories. Anyways, moving ahead. So I was talking about what I missed growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And what I missed growing up is community. I was sheltered from my Chineseness. It was I'm understanding now as a writer, as a 46-year-old woman, that it was a dangerous thing for my parents to carry this identity. And they did their best to shield me from what they felt was a liability. And my father, he's a wonderful man, but it was his pride and joy that I could speak English without an accent. And what I had to give up for that, right? So anyway, moving to the GTA, I was just like, oh my God, I was so excited. 40-year-old lady, I'm like randomly just like pouncing on Asian women and being like, hey, are you a Cantonese speaker? And they would be like, no, I'm Japanese. And it'd be like so embarrassing. Like I'm so countryside, Anyway, so, what I'm looking for and what I would love to be able to give to my children is, us underachievers who like our language skills suck, and my children they do not want to learn Chinese. Like I cannot help them with that. I can't give them what I don't have, right? To have some kind of venue where all of us are invited, our whole family. Like it's for me, I can go as an adult to Cantonese school. I can like sign up and get a Cantonese tutor, but I can't bring my kids, And I would love some kind of, I don't know, I leave that to all of you brilliant brains to figure out, like, how could we replicate something that's outside of a temple, like outside of language school, outside of our business mentorship networks, where like my children can connect their mixed race, and I had to argue with them. Like they'd say, they're in French, they're in Francophone school and everything like that, being a good Canadian, trying my best to fit in and everything. And I had to argue with them for a couple of years. You're not English. We're English, Mama. We speak English and French. We're not Chinese. Listen to me. I'd be arguing with them. You're Chinese too. No, we're not. No, we're not. So that whole thing, I don't have a venue. I don't have a place to plug them in. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I like the family approach to programs too. Betty, welcome up again. I can't unmute you, but if you look right under the two of us, there's a video button and a mute button on the very far left. Ronald, welcome up.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. I know we have about 4 or 5 hands up. Alvin, you're next. And thanks, Donna, for all your help and organize the speakers too. Oh, Bo and then Alvin. Okay.
Hi, it's me again. I love these conversations. I love conversations about dreams and looking to the future. I do want to kind of bring something up I feel like hasn't been discussed a lot, which is, I really think that, Albert spoke truth power when they talked about, so many of us in this discussion here have in some ways earned a seat at the table. And that's why we're in these discussions, right? And I kind of just want to draw attention to, who's not at the table, who in our community is not in these spaces, whose voices are not being heard. Because I think for us, in order to have a community that thrives, we have to have a community that survives, right? And there are so many folks who are, unhoused, people who are living in poverty, queer folks, disabled folks, recent immigrants, especially around the Chinatown area, like they're so visible to us. And I really think that, I would love for us, organizations like the ACCT, who's doing such amazing work, and other folks who, support, whether it be, developing leaders and these programs and stuff to, put more resources and spaces dedicated to frontline support for these folks. And there's such a big spectrum of need. There's just, safety, unhoused, folks, queer, trans folks who need that support. But also, as we see in the pandemic, for the first time in my lifetime, at least, I'm pretty young, I am, during the pandemic, we're seeing this huge need to pay attention to public safety for Asian folks, especially, femme expressive Asian folks in public. that's something that's happening. And I would love to see resources and spaces dedicated to these conversations. My personal opinion is that patriarchy is such a big issue, but I am somebody who, I'm non-binary, but I present masc often. And when I'm presenting masculine, I see the privilege that I have compared to my more femme-expressive friends who often are in fear of their safety. They're coming to downtown to work or they're doing stuff at work. And I just really hope that I really love programs that develop leaders and mentorship programs that develop, for folks like us. But I also think about who has, barriers to access those programs and how do we take care of those folks and, dedicating spaces, for example, to talk about patriarchy within our community, to talk about homophobia, transphobia, unhousedness, poverty. I think that's super important. So that's something that I've been sitting on the idea of starting an Asian Justice Collective in Yeung for a long time. And I actually took all the Instagram handles and I got the Instagram handle Asian Justice Collective, which is so wild because you would have thought that somebody would have grabbed that already, but it kind of shows the work that still needs to be done in our community here. So if anyone is interested in, kind of mulling on this idea, feel free to reach out to me. It's very much in its infancy, but I do want to see more resources and spaces dedicated to those frontline supports that take care of the most vulnerable in our community. Thanks.
Thanks, Bo. Looks like you have a national collective coming up. Thanks. And Betty, we have you up again. If you try clicking the camera button and the mic button just on the right below us on the left-hand side, under the row of icons, that could help.
Can you hear me now?
I actually can't unmute you. So
you can hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, I've been in Canada for over 40 years. I marry a white guy. So I want you to not to forget to recruit those cross-race second generations. And another thing is I benefited from active in the Canadian labor movement. We just have Chinese female activists elected as the Canadian Labor Congress as the Secretary Treasurer. So we should be so proud of her. She even her own daughter, who's biracial, also is active in the QP, Canadian Union for Public Service, being valued by that. And we need to participate in the labor movement because it's legally have a chance to do so. Even though you're not unionized, reach out to your labor council because in Toronto we organize a new it's called Chinese Workers Network. Even we advocate for non-union Chinese workers, particularly those Chinese workers not being paid when the restaurants are closed. We also learn not just use militant way to advocate for them. We as a labor council, we went to talk to the owner before we protest. So that we just want to do this dispute resolution process and to get the workers paid when they realize that when the owners realize that you're dealing with a whole labor movement behind them, they will pay the workers. So I just want to bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, for that very important reminder about the next generation as well. That might be of mixed blood. Welcome up, Ronald.
Okay. Oh, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. We have 3 more speakers on the list and 4
Okay,
minutes.
I just want to.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, everything Jessica said, I understood, and I'm a little bit older. I grew up in the 50s, right? But I've experienced many of the things she did, but I reacted differently. And it because of where I grew up. And I was thinking, if people want to talk about who they are, the structure, think of it, make it simple. Phylogeny begins with ontogeny. If you want to understand the structure, go back to the source. And I thought, in 6 words, describe what does an Asian Canadian mean? And give me a 6-word answer, and that will start the floodgates open. And my 6-word answer to what does an Asian Canadian mean? Mine was, I grew up in North Lethbridge, and I can write a whole story about growing up with 13, 14 different immigrant ethnic groups. on the wrong side of the tracks, which our people built, so the poor people had a place to stay. And the people we did not like on the other sides were the wealthy English and Scottish people. But all the immigrants, the Poles, the Italians, all of the Chinese, we had the fellowship of sports and supporting each other. And we had a reunion, and I went back and we looked at each, and there wasn't racism there. And we were tough. And I look at some of the key people that graduated. One person, his Chinese parents couldn't speak any English, and the white neighbor signed his form so he could participate in sports. He became the technical engineer that designs all the rides for Disney. I have another fellow. I remember I saw him chopping down trees and being a kind of a vamp. Played 7 years for the Chicago Blackhawks, and it goes on and on. This was a list of North Siders, and there.
I appreciate that's a very tangible tool too. That tangible tool.
But some of the tangible tools, we should tell our stories and put them on a website, and then you can see the diversity. And another thing is how to get people to advocate. I was a speech and debate coach for years, and I had to pull teeth to get the Chinese kids to come out. And the parents were telling them, don't do that. You got to be a doctor, study and get high marks. And I had some Chinese kids that I actually forced in speech and debate, and they came for a while, and then they dropped out later. And I saw them later, and they said, I sure wish I should have stayed, because I would have moved up higher in management. I would know how to make presents. And speaking and debating is an art. It's learned. And that's what we should have, our speech and debate programs, and also social media. We could build a television studio, and I actually built one. I got and I got the whole thing donated to a youth group, so they can start doing that. And you can work in media present. Anyways, that's some proactive things I want to say. Now,
thank you so much, Ron.
Get off.
Yeah, very tactical things too. Programming. We had workshops mentioned earlier. Now we're getting into debate, speech, communications. Thank you, Alvin.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Got my camera turned off. Okay, I'll try to make this quick. So one of the action item I kind of want to push out there is I want to challenge everyone to learn more about facts. Right? It might sound cheesy or whatnot, but especially nowadays, with there's so much propaganda, false information, fake news going on there. We might see, Trump supporters believing in QAnon conspiracies, but those propaganda is happening even to any of us, right? So I would challenge anyone, and especially the leaders, because as a leader, if your actions, the direction that you're taking people are not based on facts and not based on false informations or propaganda, then you're taking it into the wrong direction, right? One of the very good example is there's this one environmentalist leader that used to be anti-nuclear power, right? So she planned rallies to go protest against nuclear power, and then later when she actually learned about nuclear power, she realized, it's actually the most environmentally friendly form of energy. So now she's an advocate for nuclear power.
Yeah, that's
right?
a really good example.
That's right. So as a leader, especially for the younger people, they tend to have that confidence with them that they think they know how the world works, right? That's how I used to think too, right? So, but if you actually dive deep, do more research, and understand how the world works, and especially with Chinese Canadians, with the tension between U.S. and China, there is definitely a propaganda campaign going on to try to demonize China. So if as a leader, if you're taking actions, even though it comes from a good place, right? You want to do good things, but if your information is based on false information, you might lead to the wrong direction. So that's just kind of want to challenge everyone to do more study and try to cut through the bullshit, really, but by the media, and learn the truth, right? And our actions should be based on the truth, right? In order to do what's right. Okay, so thank you very much.
Really appreciate that. So Georgia and Sandra, and then we'll wrap this one up. Thanks, Georgia.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to really echo what Bo said around, what we need in terms of paying attention to who is not at the table, especially those who are systemically and structurally excluded. And especially when we're looking at the recent attacks in Atlanta on Asian women, it was also an attack on sex workers and massage parlor workers, which are not always the same, but there's also definitely an overlap. And so I think when we're looking at some of our calls to action around anti-Asian hate crimes, for example, we also need to look with our partners in other communities as well, in other cultural communities. So, around the Black Lives Matter movement, and, how can we introduce equitable and, and humane policing so that we are not reinforcing a lot of those structures of oppression that also predominantly targets sex workers and massage parlor workers. So we're looking directly at, who is not in these conversations, and really working with organizations like Butterfly or Red Canary Song, which are collectives for migrant sex workers and all of that, so that we're really helping those who are the most vulnerable in a lot of these attacks too. And that we are not, we're confronting white supremacy as an institution. We're not calling for more policing when policing actually harms a lot of our communities, and we're also hurting a lot of these people who are using this as tools of survival as well. So I think we really need to do that active outreach, because a lot of the people here, we have the time to come in and spend our Saturdays, and I think it's great that we have our Saturdays and our Fridays and all of this to go to the Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit. But there are so many people who are not able to take the time off of work to come into the Chinese Canadian Leaders Summit. And it would be great to do that direct outreach to those communities and be able to support them in having their voices in these conversations directly, when they are always left out of these conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that very important piece. I think wrapping this up, I wasn't able to pay too much attention to the chat box. So Sandra, why don't you say a few words, and then I'll give us a quick summary.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, William. You're doing a fantastic job. And I want to say thank you, shout out to everyone that's been working so hard in putting this summit together, because we wouldn't be where we were if we don't have that. And thank you to Teresa and to Patty and everybody as well. I think this is such a great way, and this is one of the things that we need to continue doing. This type of conversation that we have just started needs to continue in order for us to understand. And I agree with Elvin that says, facts. We do need to have facts. We can't just go on assumptions or hearsay. And I think one of the start for that is we need our media people. We need the media people to have the facts. So when they go out, because people listen to the media, they listen to the news, they watch the news, so we need to make sure that they have the facts as well. So when they come out with real truth and what it is to be a young Chinese Canadian growing up in Canada. How do we resolve that? So those are things. I know that from our city, from my perspective, what we're doing is, I also think that interchangeable or generation getting together is very important. In fact, we have actually started programs like that in our community center where we do have those things, where we bring the young and the old together, because I find that the young tends to listen to their grandparents. The seniors tend to listen to the kids, to the grandchildren. So it's a perfect conversation, and having them together doing things and everything, I think is so important. And of course, that mentorship is also very important. And as Albert says, it's not just a program, it's about the mentors listening to the mentees. It's not just having you telling everything what to do. It's getting that exchange. I think the communication exchange is so important. So anyway, I know we're out of time. Thank you, William. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Sandra. I think with the breadth of comments we've had, I like how we didn't just stick to the what and the programs, but really good conversation on the who should be at the table, who must be included. And I want to expand that who one step as we consider programs next weekend. And it's to learn from other communities as well. There's some communities out there, namely the Ismaili community that I'm aware of that has really strong programs for their youth. And so that's something I'd want to explore further. So thanks for that space. I know we're a bit over time, and Teresa, I'll pass it back over to you.
Well, thank you, William, for the fantastic facilitation. Now, we're running a little bit behind. I took the 11 pages of notes so far. For those of you who know me, I like to take notes. So I'm not going to provide you any kind of my observation, but I'd just like to say lots of food for thought. Thank you to Tesicca and the plenary for starting the conversation, and thank you for all of everyone's participation today. I think that you have all you have all contributed to a very powerful conversation today, very dynamic conversation. So I just like to say, someone used the word challenge, so I like to use that challenge. Many of you are so right. The reason ACCT we're doing organizing this event is because we know that we need this conversation, and it's not an easy conversation with our community at the current time. I actually had 12 to 14 Zoom meeting days for the last 3 weeks because I had to make a lot of personal connection, conversation with people to help them understand what this event is about. So I'd like to challenge all of you. If you believe in the power of this conversation, that you reach out to other people that you think can contribute to and benefit from this conversation the next 5 days, to also invite them to be to the third and fourth session. So and also that thank you for the contribution to the potential actions. But I would also like to give all of us a reminder that what we have proposed for the 29th is to develop a collaborative action plan. It's not the ACCT action plan. We struggle to actually support the Mighty Network. We struggle to pay for this event. So it is going to be a collaborative effort. So with that, I would like to go to our next piece as soon as I can so that you can network. So I would like to now introduce to you our guest, Amy Wong. So, our conversation have more implication in, amongst us and beyond, right? So, so following is a brief policy response. So Amy is a program manager with the Community Support, Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Initiative Program at the Department of Canadian Heritage. And so also worked previously with the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So I would like to Amy actually, so I would like to welcome Amy and have her provide some thoughts on what she heard and what she would take back to her department from a policy making perspective. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you all for having me here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm a settler on the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. A land that my parents arrived to over 40 years ago and for which I am deeply grateful to be able to reside here. I'd like to first start by thanking Tesicca for basically summing up so much of my experiences growing up, and even more so in the last few years and this last year in particular. Just like with Judge Wong, Tesicca made me cry back in 2019 at the first summit. And now today, Judge Wong made me cry today. So thank you for that really vulnerable sharing of stories and poems and poetry. I think about what we were discussing in 2019 and the continuation of these conversations into 2021 and how that's now layered with the learnings of the first summit and the experiences of incredible trauma to Asian and all racialized communities throughout this pandemic. Today's session resonated so strongly, both personally and professionally for me. It really dug deep into such important issues of intersectionality, full belonging, cultural connection, and building identity. I work in a program that seeks to support Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities. It seeks to combat racism, both overt and systemic, and also seeks to build bridges within communities. So hearing the stories and ideas of today are things that I really will take back to the work that I do and to the teams that I work with. Like Teresa mentioned, I'm here to respond today to today's topic of leadership from the perspective of my role at Canadian Heritage. And it's become so clear to me that the next generation of leadership is about finding space to talk through and embrace our identities, which are so diverse and shaped by our childhoods. And like Evan said, our origin stories, and also one of allyship with other racialized communities and intersectionality. I heard about the need for mentorship, one that's about growth, that's maybe more horizontal and not as top down. A need to increase engagement within our community, within youth as well. How to tap into those who are not at the table, and the need to connect or even reconnect with our culture. So these issues of intersectionality, reconciliation, and sense of belonging are issues that are the top of mind at the programs that I work with. And today's session just reinforces how important these issues are to our communities. I'd also like to maybe take a step back, and earlier Vivian had also asked a question about what's happening in the public service and within the government of Canada. And while I can only speak very purely on my experiences at Canadian Heritage, I can say that I manage two programs that do provide funding to anti-racism work in communities. So Community Support, Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Initiatives Program, as well as the Anti-Racism Action Program. We also have an anti-racism secretariat that has also been working within communities as well as across departments to coordinate anti-racism work from a GEO's Government of Canada perspective. And also to say that these priorities are flowing down into the priorities of our executives and within our departments as well. And that those are changes that I've been seeing throughout my time in the public service as well. I'd like to kind of get bias back some time. So I'm going to wrap up here and just say thank you to ACCT and everyone here today for sharing your experiences and giving me this really, I think, rich and rewarding opportunity to listen and to take back these powerful stories and ideas and assure you that, particularly with the programs that I manage, that I will these conversations and these ideas will be at the top of my mind moving forward. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Amy, for joining us. It's great to have a friend in government who understand some of the issues that we've been raising and talking about. So we look forward to your participation in the session and hope to continue to hear from you. So we have been saying to many people that this is not just a Zoom webinar and have promised numerous opportunities for you to meet with Chinese Canadian leaders. Now is another opportunity for you to do so. Just like yesterday, we have a list of VIPs who you will be able to meet and chat with. Unlike yesterday, we'll be opening the tables to more than one person. So if you're talking to one of our VIPs at the table, we ask that you respect the time of the other people who are at the table waiting for the VIP and limit your conversation to 5 minutes, or perhaps have a group conversation. Another feature of AirMeet is the start networking button. So you can find it under the banner and above the tables. If you haven't tried it, I would encourage you to do so. AirMeet randomly matches you with another attendee and you get to chat with them for 5 minutes. So I tried it yesterday and it was a lot of fun. So today we also have a table set up specifically for people who want to discuss the growing phenomenon of disappearing Chinatowns. So like I talked with the Prime Minister yesterday about this as well. So Sandy Yap, who is part of the working group aiming to put together a national strategy to protect Chinatown in Canada, will be at table 20. So if this is a topic that you would like to talk about, please go to table 20. So today's VIPs are, before I do that, I'm going to ask our team to extend, we'll stay behind a little bit longer so that people could actually do this networking. So we'll stay behind for an additional, 15 minutes or so that you will have the full 30 minutes. So now that the VIPs, Tesicca Truong is at table 2, table 3, Sandra, Yeung, Racco, table 4, Vivian, Kwan, table 5, Albert Wong, table 6, Evan Hu, table 7, William Lau, table 8, Jianling Chen, who's with Alpha Education and the Asian Canadian Educators Network, Dr. Lawrence Low that you have met, Kevin Wong, who's the Executive Director of the Hua Foundation, Beverly Yi, our first and only Chinese Canadian female Deputy Minister in the government of Alberta. And I'll be at table 12, Willie Wu, who's a retired city councillor, 13. 14 is Emily Chung, artistic director, Liu Pear Garden Dance Company. 15, our first and only federal Deputy Minister of the Crown, Daniel Kwan Watson is with us today, table 15. Patty Pond, CEO of Calgary Arts Development